Robert, go ahead.
Give me just one moment. Just want to make sure I get the right view for everybody.
I don't even know if we have it.
Okay, and I have to make a correction. I'm sorry, it should be 17.36, I believe. That's for budgeted positions. So we're just looking at budgeted positions. We're not looking at vacancy.
I believe the chief is going to speak to that. So
yes.
So is that okay, Councilmember Sunwall, if we wait till then?
That would be chiefly his responsibility, yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Jeans.
So I have a question in this and even in other slides to the same degree. What internal discussion do you have that makes you say, starting at the year 2013 is a more logical place than to start in 2001 or 2010? So you get a 10-year period. What thought goes into picking 2013 as the time to start this? 2013.
Well, it's because if you remember, just a simple amount of data. I mean, if you remember, we were showing 6 years into the future, and we had many requests, I think, from several council members, including Councilmember Shepherd and others. They wanted to see a snapshot going back. So we decided if we're going to go 6 years forward, we should go 6 years back as well. I mean, we can slice and dice it any way you want. If you want us to go back to 2001, we certainly can do that and provide that information. 2013. I don't know where phase 2 was. I assume that there was still a lot of phase 2 development still going on. So again, it was still a different city in 2013. Go back to 2001, there's no ridge. So there's very, very hard to compare.
Bob, we have data that goes back to, 2001 or 2 with the same charts. I think the biggest reason is this is what could fit on a PowerPoint slide and still be legible.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Chief Carrera.
Councilmember Sunwall, we lost your video. Are you able to hop back on so I can see when you have a question?
Yeah, I'm eating, and I like to eat with my mouth wide open.
That's fine. Go ahead, finish eating then. We don't want to see that. All right, Chief. You're muted, Chief. You're still muted.
There we go. Okay.
Now,
Can you turn that off? I called in on my phone so that I would, so you guys could hear me better. And so if there was an internet connection issue, then you'd still be able to hear me. So now that I've learned that I have to unmute twice, not just once. Thank you for this opportunity to present tonight about levels of service. A lot of this should just be a review for all of you. A lot of this dates back to 2015 or 16, when we began our effort towards the public safety levy and then also towards accreditation. But for those that may be listening in at a later date, my name is Mark Carrera, and I am the Fire Chief and the Director of Emergency Management. I'm not going to read these slides off to you. You know our mission and what we do. As you know, we were accredited in 2019. That's one of our very prideful items that we get to display on our apparatus. It was a lot of hard work that went into that, and it really allows us to translate to the community the levels of service much better, because it'll force us to meet over 280 requirements, or at least speak to them and document them and show that we're actually meeting them. So, and we believe internally that this translates to a higher level of service. So we're very proud of our accreditation, and you'll see a lot of the things that we have done towards that, which
you're gonna have a belly full of my semen, man. I'm gonna shoot big sticky loads now.
if we could cut caller number 7 off, I suspect caller number 7 is the one that's bombing the meeting at this point.
You want to roll?
Or caller 8. Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Yep.
You're gonna take every fucking inch of it down to the base, man, right to the
proceed.
Okay.
So after kicking off all the disruptive callers, all available seats for this meeting have been consumed, and I've locked the meeting so that no one can call back in. This is the problem with open meetings like this. Zoom has the same problem if we leave it open for people to join.
Right, whereas webinar at least gives you the option to separate the public and attendees.
Absolutely.
Kevin, I thought that Zoom gives you now the option to also have attendees, or Zoom webinar.
It does, but the decision to switch to Zoom was after this meeting information had been sent out.
Right.
And we have the ability to get set up and get everyone trained on Zoom before this meeting started.
Okay. But Zoom webinar should give us more control over this same kind of disruption from happening, correct?
Yes, sir.
I have
Right.
a question.
Councilmember Mayhew, then Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm just curious, are we, by locking the meeting or whatever those terms were that were just being used?
You muted yourself, Councilmember Mayhew. That's part of why I'd like to get Bob Sturbank
Are we
back in.
satisfied that we're still currently in compliance with whatever Open Meeting Act requirements?
Can someone just with a cell phone call the city attorney and see if we can't get him back in the meeting, or at least open it up momentarily to get him back in the meeting? Because I'd like him to address the issue that Councilmember Mayhew just brought up. If we can get him in the meeting, then, well, again, you lock it out, then we have a problem perhaps with the. Now we got 3 new callers coming in.
I thought our duty was to simply broadcast the meeting, which I believe is happening, right, by the live stream.
Well, it would take the council to have to pass emergency ordinance to change their procedures to not allow for public comment. Otherwise, I'm obligated.
There was no public comment for this hour.
Well, that's true. Kevin, did we not? We reduced it from 3 options for public participation to only 2 by using meeting versus webinar. The 2 being they could dial in by phone, or they could log into, or I'm sorry, they could, that's right, we can't do the streaming on YouTube, so that one's gone. But they could dial in by phone, or they could dial in.
We are on YouTube. That was resolved. They can
Okay.
if they dial in by phone, then they take a seat from a person who needs to participate in the meeting.
By phone being into the go-to meeting.
Correct.
All right, not a physical phone conference. All right. Is anybody working on getting a hold of our city attorney?
I posted it to Facebook, so if anybody saw him, they'd let us know.
Our city attorney is on the phone. I just spoke with him and he can hear us. He can talk.
What caller number is he?
Let me see if I can get him right back here.
Can I ask a question while we're waiting?
Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
I've heard some concerns about Zoom as far as it's not safe. So I'm just,
Yeah, we're well aware of those issues, Councilmember Shepherd.
Point of order, as far as I know, we are not recording this section and we are in a quorum. So I believe that our conversations should be non-existent. This session of the meeting is being recorded. I thought somebody said it wasn't. We stopped the live stream to YouTube.
I have our city attorney on my cell phone. He doesn't know what caller he is, but he can hear. So if you want to ask him a question.
Tell him how. You know what the question is, Jody. Can you just get the answer from, please?
Mayor, I think you may have to unmute each individual phone to determine which one he is on.
Well, I don't think I control that. Bob Sturbank, can you hear me?
I can.
Can you hear me?
He's caller 12.
Hello.
Bob, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay. Bob, we've got someone hacking the meeting.
Yes, I heard that.
So once you're into the meeting, then the only way to rectify that, because this individual has been persistently coming in and constantly hacking it and dropping it, what sounds like a pre-recorded messages. What we don't necessarily have to allow for public comment. This is being streamed, so I assume at least during this meeting we're fine to just block those callers once everybody's in there. No one else can now log in now that Kevin was going to lock it. That shouldn't be a problem for the roundtable, should it? As long as it's being video streamed for people to watch.
Correct.
Okay. Well, then let's proceed. We're going to have a different dilemma I want you to maybe think about with the staff while we're going on with this one, and that is when we get to the regular city council meeting, the council is going to have to approve an emergency ordinance to suspend their rules and procedures to not allow for public comment, or we may be dealing with this throughout the council meeting if they're going to have to leave it open for someone to do a public comment other than just observing the meeting.
Sure, and Mayor, the council rules of procedure are typically adopted by resolution.
There you go.
And so you would need an ordinance, and the council, the rules state that they can be waived in the event of an emergency, and I can in a moment have that citation I'll forward to you. So I think that the council could simply vote to waive the particular rule calling for public comment based on the emergency circumstances that occurred earlier on the call.
All right, if you could just draft it up while we're doing the roundtable, that would be great. So let's, so with that.
Will do.
All right, so with that, the roundtable's back in session. If you could start the recording again and go ahead, Robert, or I'm sorry, go ahead, Chief.
Sure, I see another name on the list there that I'm not familiar with. It says Damien. I wrote down their email address, but I'm wondering if we need to disable their mic as well. It's just under capture device.
Yeah, I see that. I'm going to leave that up to the IT staff to keep a track of those things. But if you could continue, please.
Sure, no, that sounds good. So let's see here. I am unable to move to the next slide. Robert, can you move me to the next slide?
Yeah, just prompt me when you need it.
Yep, go ahead. Okay, these are our core services offered by the fire department. It's very straightforward. We respond to incidents. We provide a robust community education process to the community, and we enjoy having a high contact with the public as well. Can we move to the next slide, Robert? This is a breakdown of our budget in the fire department and emergency management department. As you can see, about 2/3 of it represents our personnel and services. About 10% represents supplies, and that's really about all of the entire budget that we have any flexibility within in the fire department, emergency management department. Then the interfund service charges, those are what we pay for the other services that we receive from the city hall and other city departments, HR, legal, those types of departments. And I believe that also includes our interfund for our apparatus maintenance, for getting our apparatus worked on by the shops. So next slide, Robert.
That's ER&R and also IT, correct?
Correct. ER&R and IT is in there as well. This is a copy of our organizational chart. This changed in 2017 with the passage of our levy. We have myself at the top. We have the deputy fire chief now, who's second in command, and we're supported by Tom as our admin too. We have first line supervisors, either a captain or a lieutenant, and then 3 career firefighters underneath them. So at any time, one of those firefighters could be off, which leaves us with a minimum of 3 firefighters on duty 24 hours a day. And then we augment at night and sometimes during the day with an additional firefighter who's a volunteer or an EMS provider that's a volunteer. Our total department size is 33, but we're budgeted for 16 FTEs that you saw 15 on that first chart. That's our career staff, and that additional FTE funds our volunteer program. Next slide, Robert.
Okay.
I know this is a very busy slide, but these charts shouldn't look unfamiliar to you. This is our time versus temperature chart up in the upper left-hand corner. That is basically a picture of what happens to a fire in a structure or on a car or any type of place. The fire doubles in size for every minute that goes by, and it's our job to try to get there as soon as possible. Our goal is between 4 and 6 minutes because we don't want to hit flashover. That's that line at the very top up there. And what happens with flashover is that's when everything ignites in a room and that no life is sustainable in that room. So we want to get there before the flashover occurs. And then similarly, on the bottom right-hand corner, that's our sudden cardiac arrest chart. Basically, your chance of survival reduces by 10% for every minute that goes by. So if we get there 8 or 10 minutes afterwards, you have an 80 to 100% chance of not surviving that event. King County has one of the highest, if not the highest, cardiac arrest survival rate, and we also enjoy that in this community. We have a young and healthy community, so we enjoy those high survivability rates as well. One of the things on the time temperature chart, just really quickly, there's a little arrow that says unit on scene at 6:08. I borrowed this chart from another department, but right where that arrow is, if we had a residential sprinkler ordinance and every single building had a sprinkler in it, it's highly probable that we would never reach flashover, and you would see that fire growth chart remain at about that same level where that arrow is, because the sprinklers would actually keep the fire from getting to flashover and protect the lives that are in the building. So that's why fire chiefs like sprinkler systems in buildings. We understand the political challenges associated with them, but like fireworks, we'll continue to advocate for both of those. Next slide, Robert. This is a copy of our adopted standards that the council adopted a few years ago. This relates to our standards of coverage document that was required for our accreditation. Our standards that we adopted was a turnout time of 1.5 minutes. I didn't put the performance in there because I didn't have it at the time, but we are hitting about 1 minute and 42 seconds, 90% of the time, which is really remarkable because a lot of departments are still around 2 minutes in this region. EMS, BLS is 6.5 minutes to get there. ALS is 12 minutes. That's adopted by the county, and as you can see, our performance to the right of that. Fire low risk is when we send a single engine to a call, like a brush fire or car fire, and then a fire high extreme is either a commercial building or a structure fire. Similarly, hazmat or rescue incident, a higher extreme risk. Those are events that require a full response from the county where we get additional resources in. And with that, we can go to the next slide.
Or hang on one sec, Chief. I neglected to ask that the council members write down or hold their questions to the end, but if you just had a quick clarifying question on the information you're looking at, go ahead, Councilmember Holder.
Yeah, just BLS, ALS. If you're using an acronym, what is it?
Sure. No, that's a great question. BLS is basic life support. That's our aid unit. That's the level that we provide. And ALS is advanced life support. That's paramedic response. We get that from the Bellevue Fire Department. Most of the time they respond out of North Bend Fire Station 87, but if they're not available, we get a resource out of Issaquah. They're the provider for the I-90 corridor. Okay, next slide, Robert. So this chart here, the reason why I put this chart in here is I wanted to just show you the percentage of incidents that are low risk or medium risk that we can handle on our own. So that upper right hand chart that shows effective force head count by risk. Our low, medium risk for BLS and fire, you'll see 3. That's our minimum staffing during the day. And when you look at that chart below it, 85% of the incidents that we go on are basically single unit responses. So we can handle 85% of the incidents on our own in the city of Snoqualmie. And then anything above that, we have to call in mutual aid, whether that's from Eastside Fire and Rescue or the Falls City Fire District just outside of the city. And then when you look at our response breakup, the super majority of our incidents, 61%, are EMS related, and then the other 39 is fire related. That's very common in this day and age. A lot of fire departments have very similar standards where the majority of the work that we do is EMS related. Okay, next slide, Robert. So moving on to emergency management, we're actually doing a lot of things with emergency management as of late with this pandemic, unfortunately. But basically, the way we approach emergency management is by that chart that you see in the middle. Our goal is to mitigate and prepare for events, and then if a disaster happens, we go into the response phase. We're in the response phase right now of this pandemic, and we're starting to plan for recovery efforts. So this is this constant reevaluation that we go through, and we do it for all types of disasters, and we approach it the very same way. And I'll talk about that, I believe, at the regular council meeting with an update on the COVID-19. Next slide, Robert. These are our response performance measures that we've established within the city for emergency management. It's about keeping our comprehensive emergency plan updated, training hours within the city, because we're responsible for making sure the preparedness training is all taken care of for the entire city. And then we also have an established standard for CERT training members within the community. It's kind of a moving target all the time because we lose CERT members. That's why we want to make sure that we continue to train them. Some of those pictures on the right, that upper picture was from the 2009 flood, where that's the Kimball Creek part that comes right into the river is flooding that the walkway bridge. And then the picture below them is actually just from this previous January, where we had all that rain and flooding. And this was a car that drove off the road, and we had to send in our swiftwater rescue technicians to go in there and get them with our kayak. So moving on to the next slide, Robert. So I just wanted to capture just some of the outstanding items from our last budget effort, and these are kind of some of the things that I know are near and dear to some of the council members' heart. They're near and dear to our heart as well. But unfortunately, because of bandwidth and time within our organization, we just don't have the time to do it. Our first priority is maintaining our accredited status, as I mentioned before. That's something that we believe translates into higher level of service to the community and allows us to meet that bar that only four other departments in the state have reached, and we're the only combination fire department in the state that has achieved accreditation. So we really want to make sure that we continue to maintain that. The FireWise program, expanding our volunteer and EMS programs, expanding our wildland firefighting programs. That's becoming very contemporary on the western part of the state here. Something we never thought that we would have to worry about at the end of the day was wildland fires over on this part of the state, but we're seeing it more and more. So at some point, we'd love to train up all of our firefighters to wildland firefighting. But right now we have 5 or 6 of them that are trained, but we'd like to expand on that. And then from emergency management side of the house, we'd obviously like to begin a Map Your Neighborhood program. That's where we actually begin identifying responders within the community and training them up so that when a disaster strikes, they can actually respond in the community to those events. And then we just look for those supervisors, for lack of a better term, that are in the neighborhoods that we will work with when we get there to help support the disaster. And then also we'd like to implement some business safety continuity programming. These were all things that were part of our plan when we submitted our budget at the beginning of this biennium. We had asked for an additional staff person in the fire side, and if that wasn't available, then a third of an emergency management contract staff to help support these programs. There were other competing interests, obviously, so we weren't successful in doing that. But these are things that we still continue to pursue when time allows or if light duty staff is available. And then lastly, these aren't any surprise, ladder truck. I know you guys have heard about that. We continue to pursue grants and look for ways to fund that. And then lastly, from a kind of a long-headed strategic planning perspective, when the opportunity presents itself, fire station relocation. We don't believe we're currently in the right location. It should be further up the ridge, even closer to where the police department is. So eventually when the city gets around to doing master planning and looking at having to remodel buildings, we'll certainly be raising our hand to say, hey, this may be an opportunity to consider relocating the fire station. And we can go on to the next slide, which is questions, and I can take any questions that you may have.
I just wanted to add that it's the chief, when he spoke about the 2016, it was really quite a milestone year to get that levy lift passed and get that additional firefighter. They used to have to do a lot more kind of jerry rigging of the schedule week to week or month to month to fill the different shifts. By having that one more person, they could evenly have 4 FTEs assigned per shift to really make that a much smoother operation. So that was a pretty big deal. Councilmember Mayhew.
Sorry, I was just sending a message because Councilmember Lassay, they're going to open it up, try and let Councilmember Lassay in. But anyway, I just wanted to ask, Chief, and I know we're just doing a quick overview here, but just at an overview level, could you just tell us that there was 2 questions I had. One is, you mentioned that the staffing that we're at now ensures that we have 3 firefighters on duty all of the time. And so my question is, so there's 2 questions here. The first question is, what if we were looking to cut costs and we wanted to cut somewhere so that for some period of time that goes below 3? Could you just talk about what's the impact of a decision like that? What ramifications would there be sort of generically? And then the other was in terms of time versus combustion, and the time versus the survivability on those events. I think you mentioned a cardiac event, but I just, is there anything, as we potentially cut or expand funding, is there anything that we might do inadvertently or I know you would tell us, but anything we need to avoid doing to hurt those response times? So, yeah.
No, those are great questions. So from my perspective as the fire chief, the last thing that I'd be recommending for the fire department is to cut our shift staffing on the line. If we were forced to make cuts, we would have to look at cutting everything else before we would get to that point of wanting to, or even having to have to cut our daytime operations or our 24-hour operations staffing. That is the bread and butter of the service that we provide. They're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the insurance policy that the community has voted positively for back in 2016 to support to get us to that level. So that would be the last thing we would cut. If we had to cut at that level, I will tell you right off the bat, if we were to try to maintain our accredited status with that level, with a reduction in staff, then we'd be forced to use more mutual aid to do that. So, and if we start using more mutual aid, it's highly probable that they would start engaging us because we were using way too much mutual aid. The other side of it is beyond using mutual aid, we're also now sending units that are further away. That puts the public at risk because units are responding from further distances. And whenever we respond on an incident, that puts the public at risk. That's why we try to avoid that at all costs, having to go on emergency incidents. So that would be the first piece that would go. So if we were forced into that arena, what would likely have to happen is we'd have to abandon our accreditation efforts, and then look at other ways to try to staff the organization. We would obviously continue to use our volunteers as best we can, but it would become very complex, and at the end of the day, putting the community at risk. Similarly, with the time versus combustion chart and the cardiac arrests, when we assembled those response times and we established those numbers of 3 as a minimum that we send, those were based on tasks that are being performed on those incidents. So if we were to look at going to reducing staff, then on those high-risk incidents, we would end up having to add another resource to those incidents, which again, they would be coming from further away, which would blow our response times on the other side of it out of whack, and again, force us to have to re-look at our response time standards that were adopted by the council initially back in 2014 when I first got here, but then they were reaffirmed in 2015 when we adopted, or 16 when we adopted the standards of coverage. So in the fire service, time really matters for us, getting there quickly. We do know these things, that people will survive events if we get there quicker, and fire damage will be reduced if we get there quicker. So that's why it's so important that we have those minimum numbers on the scene, and that's why we respond in that level.
And Councilor Mayhew, I meant to add earlier to your question and to the point I was making earlier, is that one of the other critical things in 2016 that we were realizing was there's an economies of scale we can grow into as a community as we grow, but with fire, what becomes an increasing risk is multiple calls. So when you have a truck that goes out with all three or four of your FTEs, and then suddenly a second call comes in on a serious incident, we're re-exposed, and that's when we have to rely on mutual aid, which will delay response times. So that's a vulnerability. At least we haven't having 4 FTEs with some volunteers. There's the possibility of sending out responding to multiple calls.
Thank you.
I had Councilor Ross and 1 or 2 other hands were up. Councilor Ross and Councilor Jeans.
Okay. Over the past couple of years, we've had higher overtime in the fire department, and I think a lot of it's been because of medical issues. But are we proposing this year for adding additional firefighters or additional volunteers to help mitigate some of the overtime in the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We actually decided to approach this in a little bit of different way. So since 2017, all but 2 weeks up until last week, we were down at least one firefighter caused by either a work-related injury or an off-duty related problem. Whether it was a surgery or something like that, or birth of a new child, those types of things. So, and we've been watching that overtime continue to climb, and we continue to pull it back down again, and then it continues to climb. So what we've decided to do is we actually met with our labor union and engaged them and established a memorandum of understanding with them, where recently we hired a new firefighter to replace Matt Mundy, who had left and gone back to his home department. And they actually were willing to negotiate an alternative schedule for that last firefighter that we had just brought on, to where that individual is working a modified shift where they work they won't work a traditional A shift, B shift, or C shift. They'll actually work vacant shifts, and those vacant shifts were being filled by overtime before. So it's allowed us to cut back the overtime and limit it to a certain dollar amount versus actually having to fill them all. We're still currently down one firefighter right now, who's out and potentially could be retiring later this year. But with approaching the union and working with them and getting them to come to the table and getting them to understand the challenges that we're facing financially, they were very interested in engaging the city on that conversation because they didn't want to lose that level of service as well. They want to keep 3 firefighters at a minimum on duty 24 hours a day.
Right.
If we do get in a position of multiple firefighters being out, that would be a different story. We would likely go to the union and engage them as well and begin a conversation like what you were just talking about, Councilmember Ross. But right now, we've taken that first step and have worked with labor. And if it wasn't for the outstanding labor relations that we have between the staff and the city and the union, we wouldn't have been able to achieve this because a lot of unions wouldn't do this type of MOU.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
We'll go to Councilmember Jean, so we might have to end it there in order to leave our police chief a little time. Just to give Perry some assurances, we'll probably have time in the regular council meeting we can spill over into to help you, give you time to finish. Councilmember Jeans.
You made an effort, Chief, to distinguish 15 versus 16 FTEs, and you identified that 16 as a volunteer. And so I would still like some clarification as to whether there's 15 paid firefighters. But actually, Councilmember Ross has brought to our attention the importance of volunteers. I'm not sure you have captured the training of those volunteers and the time the firefighters put into training. Did you capture that in these slides or not?
No, I did not. I was trying to take a real high-level approach without dipping too far down into the weeds. The difference between 15 and 16 on the FTEs is just for budgeting. That's how they determine the numbers at the finance department. We have 15 career firefighters, including myself and Tom Monroe in the admin. And then the 16th is actually just the budgeting number that we use for volunteers. I made a point of calling out we have 33 people in the organization with 16 FTEs. That 33, those additional 18 volunteer firefighters and EMS providers are required to meet the same minimum standards of training as the other firefighters. So that work is shifted onto our company officers. That was that piece that I talked about in those outstanding items about expanding the volunteer program. Not only getting on additional volunteers, but also having a way to have a dedicated training officer that can focus on them at least part of the time. That's in the office that can be their direct point of contact. We currently don't have that right now, and we're using the company officers across all 3 shifts. But they are required to meet those same training requirements. They work side by side with the firefighters. If somebody calls 911 and they see a group of firefighters come in, you're not going to be able to tell which ones are the volunteers and which ones are the career. And that's something that's very different compared to other large agencies in this region. And that's one of the things that I'm certainly very proud of, that when they come in, they're working side by side with the firefighters and they're providing that service, and it's truly neighbors supporting neighbors.
Thank you.
All right, Chief, thank you. I'll have to end you there and then ask the Chief Perry Phipps to come up and present then.
I'm going to be sitting in Mark Carrera's spot there. So if it doesn't look like Mark Carrera, it's not. So I'm gonna go through kind of on a high level, quick. I do have enough time, so this isn't cutting me very short. Maybe some of the questions it will, but obviously I'm going to touch bases on what we do. I think most people know what the police department does, what our resources and how much it costs, and then how it compares maybe historically into other agencies in the area. So the first page obviously is a description of who we are. We actually have 29 full-time employees working for the department, and that's for both North Bend and Snoqualmie. City of Snoqualmie actually has 16.36 or 17.36 employees as of the ILA that was signed last year with North Bend, which they took a little bit over 2.5 employees, full-time employees, from our budget to theirs. So if you can do the next page for me, Robert. Again, core services is known. We patrol, we respond, we investigate, and we do a lot of outreach to the community. Next page.
Councilmember Holloway.
Oh,
So, the bullet on animal control, I thought we paid the county for animal control.
Yeah, we don't do that. That's an agreement contract outside of our city. I think I was just put in there just to say that's a responsibility that is with the police department, but we do go outside on that.
Okay, it is contracted through the police department. Okay, thank you.
Okay, this next is just like the fire chief had talked about on his. We have about 63% of our personal or our expenses in our budget go to personal services. Really, the only discretionary money that we have to use is the 6%. And that comes from services, supplies, and other contracts. The intergovernmental and the interfund are set. Interfunds, like fire, obviously, ER&R and IT are included in that. Next page.
Councilor,
Go ahead.
Just a quick question, Chief, on that last slide. When we think about that inner service, I assume most of that's your vehicles, right? Most of that interfund service charges is the ER&R. It's all your vehicles and operating them and so forth. Is that right?
That is a large portion of that fund, yes.
And IT. Vehicles and IT are your big money items in that. All right, yeah.
True. So if we go to the next page, Robert, it's our organizational chart. And this is just identifying Snoqualmie. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have 29 employees. Well, this is only reflective of what we actually have, which is a 17.36 employees that are actually paid out of the Snoqualmie budget. And if you look at it, it'll identify that we fund for 2 police sergeants. We actually have 4 positions. Police officers, we fund 8. We actually have 16 that would actually be on patrol. So this organizational chart is just exclusively for the Snoqualmie responsibility of patrolling our city. Next page. Levels of service, and what does that mean? And I think I've talked about this before, and some of you, I'm sure, have heard me talk about levels of service, and a lot of it has to do with the quality of life in the community itself. And what does that entail? That entails, do our citizens feel safe? Do they feel comfortable going to the store? Do they feel comfortable going to a park? Do they feel threatened at any time if they're walking around at night? Quality of life issues. Do we respond to no call too small? That's a quality of life standard that we've set that will go to all calls no matter what. And so when we talk about levels of service, that's not normal. Many communities, police departments do not respond to many types of calls. Accidents with no injuries, thefts with no suspect information, certain calls like that we respond to. And so the level of service, when we talk about that, is what is the community expectations? Do they expect us to respond to all those types of calls, or are they okay with us not coming to every call? Are they okay when they call and ask for our assistance that we say, no, we really don't respond to those calls? And then our service outcomes is, I think it's pretty well known that every year, including this year, we're in the top 5 of safest cities in Washington. And this year we did it again. We were number 4 as safest city in Washington. And in fact, what's even more impressive this year was we were number 1 with the violent crimes. We had the lowest violent crimes in the state of Washington. And that's pretty impressive, I think. And that's one of the outcomes of what this police department does when you talk about no call too small and what the community has set the expectations. I think the community is outspoken and indicated that they expect that type of service, and they get it. Next page. Rob, yeah. So here's a question when you talk about how many officers does it take per 1,000? So we're saying 1.1, and we'll get to that in one of the next slides. What does that really mean? All that really, it's a simplistic way to look at other cities to see how many officers they have per 1,000. It's a really simple way of doing it, but it doesn't take a lot of things into account. It doesn't take the quality of service into account. It doesn't take all the calls of service into account. It doesn't take the size of the city into account, the level of crime. There's a lot of things that it does not take into account. It basically is just a number, 1 in 1,000. And it is a number, and it is a way to look at staffing needs, but we also look at other ways to do it. So what does it take essentially? And it's really simple math is what it is. So 52 weeks a year, 168 hours in a work week. So there's 168 hours, that's total 8,736 hours a year. That's how many hours are in a year. So if an officer works or can work 2,080 hours, that's without any vacation, training, personal time off or anything. It's 2,080 hours. It would take 4 officers to staff one position 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. 4 officers. But in reality, with paid time off, training, and so forth, our average is about 350. So if you subtract that from the 2,080, it's 1,730, 1,730 hours a year that one officer can work. And if you do the same kind of math, that equals 5 officers. So in reality, it takes 5 officers to staff one position 365 days a year for the whole day. So it's pretty simple as far as that goes. Again, it doesn't take anything else into account. It just talks about what does it mean when you have 3 officers? What does it mean when you have 10 officers? That kind of helps you see what it really takes to staff the police department. So if you go to the next slide. If you can look at the slide, this is actually a comparison between Snoqualmie and North Bend. And in 2018, our calls for service were high. They went down in 2019. It's still a significant increase from 2015. 2015 was about 11,000 calls for service total. And of course, this year we had about almost 16,000 calls for service. So our calls for service is increasing as we move forward, yet our number of officers remains the same. And if you look at the next slide, the number of calls per officer, this last year in 2019 was 675 calls for service for the 11 officers in Snoqualmie that could respond to calls for service. We have 11 officers that are responsible for responding to calls for service.
Keith, is part of the dip back down indicative of bringing the detectives on board that at least helped with some of that call load? Or
well, that could be because you're taking 2 people out that are not doing self-initiated traffic stops and so forth. So that could be one of the indicators of why it went down. I haven't delved too deep into that to see why it went down, but that is surely one thing. When you take 2 officers off the streets and dedicate them to do investigative tasks, your calls for service or your subject checks and self-initiated traffic is going to go down.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Yes.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay. So what was the increase in 2018? What was the majority of calls for?
Like I said, I haven't gone in depth into that, but I surely can do that. I'm just doing a high level overview of what our calls for service were. But I'll tell you, just by looking at it, I will tell you not just the detectives are part of it, but we had probably our full staff for a longer period of time in 2018. So we had a full complement of officers out there working, responding to calls and doing self-initiated activity. So that'll increase those calls for service. Next page. So the next one is talking, it's kind of identifying what I talked about earlier is it's getting into that, how many officers do we have per 1,000 residents? And we have about 1.1, which as you can see from 2001, has gone down significantly. I'll tell you 4 is extremely high. Average, depending on where you're at, East Coast is probably about 2 to 2.5. West Coast is between 1 and 1.5. And we're about
Chief, if I could speak to the history real quick. For much of the history of the city, the city could barely afford at least minimum goal of having 1 officer on patrol 24/7, 365 days a year. With the building of Snoqualmie Ridge, that became unacceptable to the historic council to have that single officer now splitting their time with the new ridge development. And so the goal was fairly early in the development to get to 2 officers per 1,000. I'm sorry, not per 1,000, 2 officers 24/7, 365 days a year, or 2 shifts, so that at least one could patrol the downtown area and one could patrol the ridge. By doing that fairly early in the development, though, as the chief said, it resulted just to get, because as he said with the formula, you need 5 officers to achieve an additional shift, officer to fill out a shift. So that's what resulted in the number spiking up to 4 per 1,000. as the chief said, extraordinarily high. And I think the conclusion following that was that we need to hold the growth of the police department and let the community grow into the police department. And so as the population increased, the officers per thousand number began to drop. It's when we got to 2016 that that metric started informing us that it's getting too low. And that was when the conversation about the additional detectives, particularly with the call volume increases with that population as well. And so again, that's why these metrics are very helpful to sort of inform where those stand.
Thank you. That's correct. Robert, next slide. So this is the comparison that I was talking about, and this is related to our staffing of our organization. Like if you're looking at an organizational chart, it talks about command staff. We have two sergeants, 11 officers, 2 admin. So compared to other like communities or in the area, like I said, we have 1.1 officers per thousand. Enumclaw is 1.5, Issaquah 1.2, 1.4 for Lake Forest Park, Mercer Island 1.3, and Monroe is 1.7. So you can see we're on the lower end of the 1.1 thousand. And additionally, our organizational chart is, when you look at that, or you say, is there too many chiefs, or is there not enough chiefs, or is it just about right? I think we're on the lower end of that as well. And that kind of goes along with when I first, last year's budget, or 2 years ago, when I identified a need for an additional sergeant. But there's always needs, but this is what we have right now, and I think we do a great job at what we have currently.
So one of the factors that drives these numbers per thousand, if you look at FBI statistics, is the demographic of the community. In communities that you find higher than normal per capita income, higher than normal education rates, and on both those accounts were quite high, you often have lower crime rates and can result in some of these about 1.2 per thousand officer ratio. So when you compare us to like communities, not just in size, but in demographic, like Issaquah, Mercer Island, we're right in line, we're right on the low side. The point being, by that number, you can see if we were to cut officers, we would risk slipping down below even the margins for communities of that like demographic and size. Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Holloway.
So how do these?
Go ahead.
Okay. How do these numbers compare when we add North Bend into the Snoqualmie number?
It doesn't change it very much. We have 8 officers and 2 sergeants for North Bend. And so they're at about 1.3. So it does skew it a little bit, but it's not really substantial. Overall, it'd take us to about 1.2 to 1.3.
Okay, Councilmember Holloway and then Councilmember Jeans.
So just, this is a really nice chart. I'd like to see a comparable chart for fire department, if nothing else, for explanations of why some of the comparisons to comparable communities are inappropriate. Secondarily, I'd love to see some of the non-head count level of service items in a comparison between communities. Do other cities do more calls per officer than we do? Some of those metrics you have, how does that measure up? Just as a full picture, not that it sways me one way or the other at this stage, but I'd like to have the full picture on both fire and police.
Councilmember Jeans. Thank you, Councilmember Holloway.
So if you look at the chart and you see us at 1.1, we win. We're the winner. But if you selected other cities, sort of goes back to my long-standing question of you have to make some judgment calls as to which cities you're going to compare us to. And I suppose if somebody wanted to make the point, there are probably other cities that have a better number than we do, and then we need to maybe take a look at them. I'm not sure I want you to expand this list, but I suspect that there are other cities that statistically show a better number than 1.1.
All right. We'll conclude this conversation with Councilmember Lassay asking a question. And Chief, as I said, we'll make sure to pick this up during the regular council meeting, the committee of the whole, so you can finish your presentation. Councilmember Lassay.
Yeah, maybe this will. I appreciate these charts, and I also agree that a similar chart for fire would be good. I would like a little more intel on, when we talk about FTE per thousand, there's a reason why those numbers are, and to me, it seems more related to calls for service as opposed to just because you have a certain number of folks. So I'd like to get more, maybe more granular at some point for both chiefs on the service calls relate to the need for the number of FTEs. It's less about a percentage of the population, but more about what your needs are.
We can do
Yeah,
that.
calls for service can be a little deceiving because there's a big difference between a call for, hey, come help me with my cat in the tree versus a break-in at the store that needs tremendous, big difference in terms of resources be committed to one call versus the other. So,
But
yeah,
and Mr. Mayor, if we're no call too small, then that's what we have to deal with.
right. That's one of the things you would want to question as you want to reevaluate. The Councilmember Mayhew's reminded me of time. We're at 7 o'clock. So we're going to do a 5-minute recess before starting the regular council meeting. But at this time, we'll have to conclude the roundtable. And again, we'll pick it up during the committee of the whole during the regular meeting. So, Kevin, did you want to speak to us about what's going to happen with the regular city council meeting?
Yes, I'd like to offer up that we switch back to go to webinar. I have a mail with all the details ready to go to send out to all the current attendees. That opens up the ability to add more people to this meeting in a safe way where we can meet everyone until I know who they are.
At the same time, Kevin, now that you've got the right people locked in here, would it be better just to leave it as is? Council could, right at the beginning of the meeting, propose a resolution as Bob Sturbank's drafting up to suspend rules to not allow for public comment during the council meeting.
That could work, but your guest presenters won't be able to find a seat.
I thought we have new guest presenters. Council, I guess I'm gonna have to ask you to log off here, go to your emails and grab the new link that Kevin sent out and log back in to the council. Okay, so
All right.
Andy. I think we need to do a few more trial runs offline on some of this stuff.
You need to not switch horses in the midstream.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, no one anticipated some uncivil behavior by some member of the public tonight. That sort of disrupted everything.
So, now that we're on this horse, can somebody just read the motion from Mr. Sturbank and let's second it and approve it so we got coverage that we at least suspended public comment because it doesn't sound like we're going to allow any.
Even if you allow it, I just don't think time is. You're going to have many members of the public say, "Give me a break." That there was no notice. I mean, with 10 seconds notice, you tell me there's where the meeting is and where I can join. That's BS. So that's why I think the best way to cure it is for someone to make the motion.
Okay, Jim or Matt, you guys have the email. The rest of us do not.
I don't, can you guys hear me? I don't have an email. Does someone think I have an email? Let me say that differently. Does someone think they sent me an email? Oh. Maybe
I don't have an email either.
Hold on, I think I found one.
I will forward it to all of the council right now.
Or just read it and we can motion it as presented and second it and do a vote.
Motion as stated by the city attorney.
All right,
Bob,
just a minute.
Yes, please.
If I may, I will read what I sent, and just by way of background, part of the council's rule 1.5 states the city council may, by majority vote, determine to temporarily waive any of the provisions herein, and the provisions herein being a reference to the council rules of procedure. So if the council wishes to waive the rule for public comment or calling for or accepting public comment, that's rule of procedure 9.4. So my suggestion is that a council member move under council rule of procedure 1.5, move council waive council rule of procedure 9.4 and decline to call for or accept public comment for the April 27, 2020 regular city council meeting.
Councilor
I make
Mayhew.
motion as stated.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion by Councilor Mayhew, stated by the city attorney and seconded by Councilor Holloway. Any discussion, council? Councilor Say.
I do not support this. I think we've had, this is not new, guys. We've done this for several meetings and now all of a sudden we have trouble. So I think this is waiving public comments and doing this because we're having IT troubles is not the way to go.
Well, it wasn't IT troubles. It was someone bombing with profanity.
I understand that it's IT troubles.
Councilor.
I just us moving forward without the ability for the public to do public comment. We've just had the draft EIS sent out. We're on a timeline on that, and people are not going to be able to call in, and they're not happy about it.
Okay, so Councilmember Shepard, are you satisfied with the current notification? I mean, in other words, we open it up and if people can find us tonight and comment, great. If not. Okay,
No.
well then you're not providing a solution then. There's only two solutions. Either continue without revising the rules and procedures and hope that people can find us, or suspend the rules and procedures, or just suspend the meeting. Councilmember Mayhew and then Councilmember Holloway.
Just, I'm having trouble hearing, so as a point of order, it appears that this keeps popping up and saying Brian Kraus is the source of the other noise that's causing me not to be able to hear. So maybe that person could mute their microphone.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Holloway.
I call the question.
All right, question has been called. And we're going to vote on calling the question. All those in favor of calling the question, say aye or raise your hand.
Point of order, there was no second.
Thank you.
Yes, there was. Oh, no, there wasn't. You're right.
Thank you, Councilmember Mayhew. Point is well taken. Is there a second on the motion? All right, there's no second, so the motion dies for lack of a second. Councilmember Shepard.
Can we reschedule?
Councilmember Ross.
Can we state, maybe put a note out there, other ways that people can public comment? Maybe they can email us or they can call in with comments into, maybe call Jody tomorrow with comments.
That's like any other day.
True.
As I recall, the last two council meetings we've done this, we've had a sum total of 0 members of the public join us. I suggest that given the cost of this meeting with the staff time and all the resources involved in doing this, I think given the circumstances, it's probably appropriate not to trip over ourselves too much and just do a suspension for this one meeting. Councilmember Holloway.
I believe IT said that they would monitor their prior meeting and with proper validation, bring those people over to this meeting. The intent of the motion was just to allow them time to do that as appropriate. So we got coverage in case somebody can't make it, but you guys keep talking.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
this is Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Just a quick reference to the statute, the Open Public Meetings Act, which obviously this was what I'm about to read you was written with reference to an in-person meeting, but I think it applies to what's happened tonight. And this is in RCW 42.30.050 interruptions procedure. In the event that any meeting is interrupted by a group or group of persons so as to render the orderly conduct of such meeting unfeasible, an order cannot be restored by removal of individuals who are interrupting the meeting. The members of the governing body may order the room cleared and continue in session, or may adjourn the meeting and reconvene at another location selected by a majority of the members. I think that's what you've effectively done by reconvening in another electronic location set up by Mr. Smith. And it goes on to say that nothing in the section shall prohibit the governing body from establishing a procedure for readmitting an individual or individuals not responsible for disturbing the orderly conduct of the meeting. And again, I think that's effectively what Mr. Smith has done by setting up a new procedure for people to register and participate. So what has transpired in terms of adjourning the previous meeting and then reconvening through the registration is entirely consistent with the procedure that is already existing in the Open Meetings Act. And then I know council's debating whether or not to accept public comment in this reestablished session.
Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Mayhew.
Well, I hope we can continue with the meeting. I observed from the attendee bar to my right that there are 29 people attending, and I assume that that's more than the electeds and the staff of the city. So I believe that there are people from the public who are attending this meeting. And if they can attend this meeting, if they can't physically get here, they should be able to get online and get to the meeting. Although my wife interjected a few moments ago that she couldn't get on the meeting.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so I'm ready to vote on this. I believe that it would be appropriate to continue, given the comments of city attorney, and looking at our agenda. I think it'd be fine to proceed. And then I think for individual items, if council members have concerns that that item perhaps shouldn't be acted on because we ought to take public comment on it, then I think for individual items, a motion can be made to postpone it, or whatever the appropriate motion is to put that off till we can get public comment. Then we can decide for those items. But I'm ready to proceed. I think we've covered the bases and we're in compliance with OPMA. Let's proceed with the bulk of the meeting.
Yeah, and Andy, is this being streamed? Or Kevin? All right, so anybody that's been watching on the conventional channel can hear these comments and be directed. Where do we direct people to go if they want to find the link to join this meeting? Hello?
Yes, Mayor, I'm still working with Joan. I've given her the attendee information and they should be up on the website shortly, I would hope.
Oh, I'm not, just, where, can I tell them just go to the website and you'll find it on the website? I don't need a link. I don't need you to say www Snoqualmie, whatever. Just say where to go.
Yes, sir.
Go to the website?
Yes.
All right. Hundreds of members of the public are listening and watching rapidly, wanting to know where to go. So go to the website, folks. Councilor Sunwell.
I make a motion to call the question.
Second.
All right. Question has been called and seconded. All those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
No.
All right. The motion, Councilmember Holloway, yours was a.
Oh my God, it was an aye.
All right. So the motion passes. So now we're going to a vote. There's no more conversation about whether there's a suspension or not. We're voting on the suspension, whether you want to suspend or not. All those in favor of suspending?
Suspend what?
What are we suspending? The public comment.
Correct. All those in favor of suspending public comment, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
No.
Okay, so my count is a 5-2 approving for suspension. So public comment has been suspended for this meeting. All right, so let's continue then.
Mayor, I don't think we've, a point of order, I don't think we've adopted the agenda yet.
Right, that's what I'm moving on to next. Thank you. Could you want to move?
Move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as presented tonight. Is there any discussion, council? Oh, Councilmember Shepherd, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to take the warrants off of the consent agenda, and I'd also like to pull AB 20-040 and AB 20-036 because they are not normal as far as what we do in a council meeting, and also they are not urgent.
The word wasn't urgent. And you can't pull stuff off the agenda. You can only pull it off consent without vote.
Point of order, can we split the motion?
Yeah, I was trying to think that through too. We're really, well, no, right now we're talking about the entire agenda. And so, Councilmember Shepherd, I would suggest maybe you making separate motions and see if the council concurs on some of these items you want to do. If you roll them all into one, it's going to be confusing and they might accept one, but not the other. So yeah, I don't think you want to bundle warrants with 040, et cetera. Why don't you make a few quick motions? Councilmember Shepherd or Sunwell?
Point of order. Anybody can pull anything off consent. There's no vote necessary for that.
Right.
I don't need a
Well, I'm sorry.
conversation.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I didn't mean that, but I take your point.
Okay, so we have two agenda bills. First is AB 20-040, and it has to do with imposing a sales and use tax fund for investments in affordable and supportive housing, authorized by the Substitute House Bill 1406. Anyway, the deadline for this is not until the end of July. And
Councilmember Shepherd, make a motion, don't make your argument, make a motion, please. We need to see if it even has a second to even bring it up for debate.
all right, so I'd like to pull this off the agenda.
Okay, move to remove Agenda Bill 20-040. Is that your motion?
Correct.
Do I have a
Point of
second?
order.
Councilmember Lissay.
I do not believe the chair has the ability to state that something is a motion and a council member can confirm that. The council member must make a motion for their action that they're taking.
Overruled. I was clarifying what the council member was trying to say to make it very clear to everybody. Councilmember Shepherd, are you offended at my clarification or was that okay?
No, it's fine.
All right, thank you. Do I have a second on the motion? Councilmember Shepherd, it dies for lack of a second. Did you want to make another motion on the other warrant?
Correct.
On the other agenda bill?
Yes, AB 20-036. Same problem. This was the ordinance for minor children to domestic violence. This is not an urgent item, and we can't have any.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I don't hear a motion.
Yeah, again, Councilmember Shepherd, if you could just make it really simple, just move to remove Agenda Bill 2036 from the agenda. Everybody understands why. Wait until you get a second, and if it goes on the floor for debate, then you can make your arguments as to why you think it should be removed.
All right, move to remove AB 20-036 from the agenda.
Right. Do I have a second, Council? Right, again, the motion dies for lack of a second. All right, are there any other items for the tonight's agenda? Right. All right, with just the warrants being removed from the consent agenda is the only item I heard. With that change, Council, do I have all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion. I'm sorry, who was the nay?
Peggy.
Okay. All right. With that, the motion passes for the agenda. We now move on to public hearings, proclamations, and appointments. And tonight we have the Older Americans Month proclamation. And for the sake of time, that's in your agenda packet. So just encourage you to read that. We'll make sure and post that and notify that after the meeting. With that, we'll move on to, I don't think, is there any chance that any citizens joined us at the meeting? I don't see any names, unidentifiable names on there.
Can you hear me? This is Alyssa Ostergaard.
Oh, let's go ahead.
Snoqualmie watershed.
Oh, yeah.
I don't see, yeah, I'm not sure I'm seeing myself on the list of attendees, but I've been, yeah, I'm able to see you guys.
And Alyssa, if you could just wait for a moment. I understand that we were going to have a presentation from the K4C tonight too, and I don't see that on my notes, Jody. Is that on the? Yeah, it's okay. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, Council. I was looking at my notes, and neither one of those presentation items made it on my notes, so that's why I was messing up there. So, Alyssa, yeah, if we let's go ahead and have you go ahead and do a presentation at this time.
Okay.
Is there a council member willing to give up their video to Alyssa so at least she can be seen? Councilmember Mayhew, okay. Well, the Mayor Pro Tem Alyssa is going to generously offer you his video, so he'll log off and allow you to log in.
Great.
And sorry for things being a bit confusing this evening.
That's okay. No problem. There I am. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Do you want me to share my screen?
I believe that the staff can give you control so that you can do the presentation from your screen.
Great. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for having me tonight.
Well, hang on. Kevin or someone, can you give control of the presentation to Alyssa, please?
Yes, sir. Just did.
Thank you. You should, if you have the presentation on your computer, there we go.
There we go. Probably need
and down at the bottom right-hand corner is a little movie screen, Alyssa. If you could click on that to put it into there we go.
How's that?
Perfect.
Wonderful. Great. Council members, thank you. And staff, thank you for having me this evening. These are very unusual times, so I'm very happy to have an opportunity to present to you remotely. I'm the Salmon Recovery Manager for the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum. And so I'm going to just give you an overview of who is the Snoqualmie Shed Forum, of which you are a member, what do we do, how do we help the community and the city. And I apologize in advance if you hear my dog and cat there. It's dinner time around here. So we're a group that is oriented around the watershed and around salmon recovery and watershed health. So this is a map of the Snohomish watershed, or also known as RIA 7 or Water Resource Inventory 7. The Snoqualmie is the lower watershed in green, and the area that drains to the Snoqualmie River flows northwest and meets up where it meets up with the Skykomish River it becomes the Snohomish River, and then they empty into Puget Sound in the Everett area. So the salmon recovery efforts here started in the 1990s. The forum, a couple different forums were established in 1998, and then the next year, Chinook and bull trout were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Local groups were not so interested in having the federal government tell them what to do to recover these fish, so people organized and contributed money and got grants and did their own science and planning processes. And locally, the whole watershed, the whole Snohomish watershed, created the Snohomish River Basin Salmon Conservation Plan, which was adopted in 2005. And then in 2007, NOAA adopted it as the federal salmon recovery plan for Puget Sound. So our watershed is a bit unique in that we have two forums, and in large part because we have two counties that the watershed crosses. The yellow line across the middle in this screen is the line between King County and Snohomish County. So the Snohomish Basin Salmon Recovery Forum is known as the lead entity, and they cover the entire watershed. They're basically responsible for communicating with NOAA and the state regarding competitive grant rounds and planning processes for salmon recovery. The Snoqualmie Watershed Forum is the piece of it that I am the lead for, and we are only govern the King County portion of the basin. So the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum, of which you are a member, has been in place since 1998. And the city of Snoqualmie was a founding member. We're on our 4th interlocal agreement, which will be good until the year 2025. There are 8 parties to the agreement, 4 cities of Snoqualmie, North Bend, Duval, and Carnation. Also King County, Snoqualmie Indian Tribe, Tulalip Tribes, and the town of Snoqualmie. So there are 8 elected representatives from those member governments, plus 3 citizen representatives, a nonprofit representative, and a representative from the King Conservation District. Per our work program, which is approved annually by the forum, we meet 6 times per year. There are 2.7 staff that the budget supports through cost shares that each partner to the agreement pays into. And the city cost shares are offset with grant funding. So your city contributes to this forum fund. The total operating budget, as an example, 2019 was $589,203. That supports mostly staff plus a little bit of operating funds. And you can see by far King County is the biggest contributor to the budget at $406,599. City of Snoqualmie is the next largest at $69.83 for last year, and the offset amount of $125,000 is a grant that comes out of a flood control district pot of money that they contribute to the 4 different actually salmon recovery groups in King County that mostly goes to grant funding, but also funds a little bit of capacity and monitoring and education and outreach. So the budget is also can be offset by a little bit of rollover savings each year. So we generally come to the cities each year, or the member will come and staff to request that budget contribution again. So what are we doing? We are coordinating salmon recovery efforts in the King County half of the basin in order to increase Chinook and other salmon numbers. And this is showing Chinook adult spawners that come back to the watershed. Historically, we estimate we had about 31,000 per year. Our 50-year plan aims to get 25,000 per year coming back by the year 2055. And these days we're hovering under 2,000 per year coming back. So you can see we still have a long way to go. So what are the strategies that we're doing to do that? Well, the science has indicated that the priority areas for recovering Chinook are where the baby salmon live. Basically, there's plenty of good spawning gravel for the few number of adult fish that are coming back. Where we're lacking is that slow water complex habitat and natural banks that the baby fish need to survive. And so near the spawning locations is where that's the most important. Along the Snoqualmie River, below the falls, in the Tolt River, the Raging River, and the South Fork Skycomish River. Those are all in King County. Above Snoqualmie Falls, it's also super important since water always runs downstream, to protect forest cover, which really helps with clean water and good flows. Also restoring streams, wetlands, and lakes for water flow in the summertime and making the water clean. So what have we done? So since 2005, there have been over 60 habitat projects completed, from planting banks to removing levees, like some of these pictures you see here, placing large wood in channels. Over 816 acres have been protected from development, 234 acres of trees planted along channels, 337 acres of floodplain reconnected. We found this is a very key thing for baby fish survival, and over 2 miles of levee removed or set back, which helps the river have more natural processes and has a lot of side benefits as well. One of the main things that our group focuses on is funding for projects, and the flood control district just doubled the amount that comes to us that we can then turn around and give away in grants. So we hold a competitive grant round every year, and we're giving away about 1.8 million now per year to various project sponsors around the basin for those types of projects I just described. We also assist a lot with grant writing and have helped project sponsors leverage another $48 million over the last 15 years or so. So that includes local, state, and federal funding. This map is to show where projects have been right in the city of Snoqualmie area. So the purple dots show city of Snoqualmie projects. Those were funded over the last 15 years to the tune of about $660,000. And the dots that you see in yellow are other groups that have been funded for projects within city limits. And this map is to show the main portion of the river in King County, where we have been focusing our efforts. Currently, there are over 29 active projects and at least 22 potential future projects have been identified after looking at what are our habitat goals in the salmon plan and where would some of those opportunities potentially be. So some benefits to your city for this include basically a group of people that are focused on the watershed scale science for the whole entire watershed, with a vision and a strategy that can be updated on an ongoing basis, because there are technical committees and other planning and policy groups that meet on a regular basis, and a lot of funding going to monitoring and planning, as well as a ton of money going to implementation of those actions. And these actions can be coordinated across jurisdictional boundaries. As you know, the sum is greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and we can have a lot more bang for our buck doing it this way. The forum meetings tend to be a good hub for building partnerships. There's a big wide range of groups that attend and participate as sponsors and members, and we are more and more having this holistic multi-objective approach to habitat projects where we can benefit not only the fish, but also farmers, flood reduction, clean water, and beautiful areas for recreation. As far as the member governments, there's our staff team has a lot of planning and strategic and technical capabilities. So we are available to your city, and we do work with your staff on a regular basis for policy planning, direct project groups support, technical assistance, planning assistance. It offers your city a seat at the table to guide the watershed vision and participate in these grant funding decisions. And I'm happy to say your staff do participate in our project ranking committee. And then we're also a good platform for intergovernmental coordination and exchange. And our staff represents your city and the other partners in regional salmon efforts, such as Puget Sound-wide salmon recovery planning and other planning efforts, including the Snoqualmie Basin Salmon Recovery Forum. So this is my last slide. We're continuing with project implementation. Like I said, we work with many, many project sponsors across the basin, from jurisdictions to nonprofits to tribes, and help people develop strong grant proposals and give out $1.8 million per year. The focus is more and more on the multi-objective funding I was mentioning. Right now, we're very much focused on updating the 2005 Salmon Conservation Plan. There's been a lot of science about water quality, climate, and where do baby salmon actually live in the watershed. And in fact, at our next forum meeting, there's going to be a really great presentation, and it will be remote, so I encourage you to tune in for that. Are the strategies that we're working on track. And so we're just there working on those strategies and also available for support. So with that, if we have time, I would love to open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, Alyssa. Any questions, council? All right, well, thank you so much for taking your time and giving us an update on all the good efforts of the Watershed Forum.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you.
And thanks for your patience. Yeah, and thanks for your patience with a bit of a chaotic start this evening too.
Oh, absolutely, it's new for all of us, so no problem.
All right,
Okay,
have a good evening. Rachel, let's.
Yes, sir. I am here.
Again, can I maybe ask a council member to generously give up their video to Rachel Brumbaugh from the King County or K4C? Thank you, Jim. And then if the staff could please give her the presentation or control the presentation.
Okay. Great. So I have two screens. Which one do you see? Do you see yourself or do you see the intro?
I think we see your screen top. You got to pull the PowerPoint presentation up or put it into presentation mode. We see it. We see Mount Rainier on your screen, on your desktop.
You see Rainier on my desktop. Okay. Hold on one second. Bear with me while I've got it. As I said, I have two presentations here. There
we go. Yeah, and if you could put that into presentation mode, that'd be great.
Yeah. Oops. Hold on. Sorry. Okay.
And Rachel, did you want to turn your video on so you could at least present to the council members?
Oh, yeah. I would love to do that. Hold on one second. I'm struggling here. I've got two.
That's kind of the theme of the night, so welcome.
Okay.
There's a little movie icon in the bottom right corner of your PowerPoint. Hey, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Brumbaugh. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm super excited about this. Okay,
Rachel, there's a little movie screen icon in the bottom right of your PowerPoint. If you could click on that movie, put this into presentation mode.
Yes, we'll do that. It is, except it pulls up on my other screen. Can you see it? Or which one do you see? You see my notes or the screen?
That'll work. Continue.
Can you see it? Or do you see my notes?
We do see it.
We see your notes.
You don't want to see my notes. Hold on one second. I am flailing here. I'm sorry.
You're probably in a split screen mode. I think if you hold down.
There we go. We are
There
good
you
now. How about that?
Perfect.
Anyway, so figured out. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you, Mayor Larson and the council, for having me here. Nicole Sanders is also on the line to answer some questions as we go through this. So I wanted to just start off a little bit about the K4C, talk a little bit about the partner cities, and then jump into the joint letter of commitment, which is why I was invited to speak to you tonight, and just go over the updates on the joint commitments. We updated it in 2019 from 2014. Now I know that several council members were listening into our K4C 101 presentation last week, and thank you for doing that. So this will be a little bit of repeat for some of them, but for some of you. But just a quick overview of the K4C. It began in 2012, and it is a voluntary but formal partnership between local governments in King County. And we are working together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, provide for the health of residents, our economy, and our natural environment. And our focus areas include, among others, energy efficiency, green building, clean energy, and transportation. And so we partner on outreach and solutions and resources. And I'll speak a little bit more to that as we get to specific examples. I want to just go over who is the K4C. It is King County and the Port of Seattle and 16 cities, which comprise a little over 1.6 million people and 80% of King County's population. So you can see all the way up to the north, down to Kent. Snoqualmie is our most eastern city. I'm going to go a little bit into the background of the joint commitments. As I mentioned, this was an update, but we really have two main guiding documents. The first is the interlocal agreement, and that is the formal partnership between the cities and the county to agree to cooperate and agree to cooperate on climate and solutions. It sets dues and sets responsibilities. Snoqualmie adopted that in April of 2012, and then later in September 2014, shortly after the joint letter of commitments were drafted, Snoqualmie approved those. But things change over 5 years, so we wanted to update them a little bit. So just a little background first. The original joint commitments, as I mentioned, were developed in 2014, and they have sector-specific guiding principles and actions for local governments to take. Again, they are voluntary, as the next bullet point mentions. The letter of commitment was optional, but most K4C partners have signed on to it. So that was in 2014, and lots of things have happened since 2014. We have a lot of technology changes. We have a lot of regulatory changes, both at the state and local level. We have a bunch of new partners. So at the June 29th K4C work session, the elected officials recommended that we refresh the joint commitments. And that's a really important word. It's not a rewrite, but a refresh. And it reflects our updated emissions inventory and analysis and new state laws. And it's informed by King County climate change workshops that we held in 2019. And let me just speak a little bit about those workshops. They were not specific to the K4C joint commitments. They were actually held to get public input for King County's 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan, which we're working on right now. We had public outreach through most of 2019. But we held 3 public workshops. We held one in Bellevue, one at the University of Washington campus, and one in South King County. We had over 250 King County residents attend these sessions. And pretty much they all wanted bolder action, faster work, more cooperation, and really were supportive of the K4C model. So that was really nice to see. So a summary of the updates, just a really high level before we jump into sector-specific updates. You know, one of the most important parts that is in the 2014 that we brought forward front and center a little bit more in the 2019 updates was the recognition that each partner may not pursue all actions. and will act where that jurisdiction has the most impact and influence based on unique jurisdiction characteristics. Our partners in the K4C are very different. We have some very large urban, we have some smaller cities, we have some cities with very new housing stock, some with much more transportation related emissions, and really want to make sure that each jurisdiction can follow the path that's right for that jurisdiction. So that's remained the same, but we brought it up a little bit stronger. Other things that have changed are the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We incorporated the Growth Management Planning Council adoption of the targets. We brought in greenhouse gas emission and pathway updates, which includes an updated emissions inventory that we ran at the county, a 2017 inventory, and different pathways analysis to reach that goal. With respect to equity and climate justice, that's something we brought in much stronger. It wasn't very present in the previous joint commitments, and we really brought in strong language and also language about a just transition for workers in fossil fuel industries. We extended the goals to 2050 for transportation and energy efficiency. For fossil fuels and buildings, we added actions to reduce fossil fuel use. For implementation, we added language about tools, specifically in mind with our climate action toolkit that's in development to help support implementation and help cities take those actions. And we added 2 new sections, one on electric vehicles that reflects the changes in technology from 2014. We have many more options on electric vehicles now, and climate impact preparedness. And that's something that's obviously, I think, top of mind with many people. So before we jump into the shared goals, I think we're in a different format here. I just want to make sure if I don't mention something that you're particularly curious about, let me know at the end and we can make sure we answer that question. But I am going to go through the different sections fairly quickly and just also note where they align with policies that the city of Snoqualmie has already put in place or other goals that you've articulated that you want to have. So I just want to start off just a little how to read this PowerPoint. The highlighted that's new. And the light blue underneath is how it aligns with existing plans that you have. So this is our shared goals. This is the commitment to work together to reach our shared goals. And the highlighted part, what's new, is actually articulating the Growth Management Planning Council goals that were adopted by all 39 cities and the county to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And the reason that they weren't in there before is that we actually put the joint commitments in before they were formally adopted. So this is really a technical change to clarify. Something that we brought in stronger here was the idea of sequestration of carbon. Obviously we're finding that forests and soil sequestration can be very powerful. The other policy commitment that's new is to adopt greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are consistent with those established by the Planning Council. So that, again, that's the self-determination that each city can decide to adopt targets that flow up in the right way. And so this aligns with your comprehensive plan to strive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by the same amount. I'm going to move on next to climate policy. And this is Rachel. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question on that last slide?
Yes.
It says reducing greenhouse gas emissions 25% by 2020. So do we know what we've achieved?
Yeah, we are actually, unfortunately, we are not on target to do that. I couldn't get you exactly where we are. Our emissions have been countywide. They have been nearly flat for a decade. They've gone down very slightly, about, I want to say about 1.5%. Which we know is not nearly enough, but it's been very challenging to reduce community scale greenhouse gas emissions when we've had 250,000 people move to the county in the past decade also, and thousands of square feet of construction. So it's really been swimming upstream in this case.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next one here. This is just to act to promote science-based limits and a market-based price on carbon pollution and other greenhouse gas emissions. Not a lot in this one has changed. We just added a couple items which would be eligible recipients of revenue from policies should a policy come into place, and we added renewable energy as well as green building. The rest is transit and energy efficiency projects, so we've kept the same. Forest protection and restoration is obviously a very important one. So it looks like this supports advocacy. We're aligned with your city goals. The next one here, transportation and land use. So this is one, this is a really interesting one because we are looking for increased transit service and mobility with the goal of reducing countywide driving per capita by 20% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And the really important part of the rest of that sentence is understanding that different areas of the county have varying levels of transit access. And so this really, I think, would be important to Snoqualmie. I mean, we understand that Snoqualmie is not particularly well served by transit at this point. And you have many drivers that need to drive to Seattle for work or to other places. We are not proposing that residents of Snoqualmie only drive halfway somewhere. That's just not going to work. That's why we look at things on a whole portfolio, a whole countywide basis, to really, in the short term, focus transit on those areas that are really densely populated. And in the long run, obviously seek to expand that transit so that it is accessible to everyone. The other part of this is really to create, dense housing so that people don't have to drive so much. They could walk or roll or bike. And I think this aligns really strongly with the economic development goals of Snoqualmie to create shopping centers and retail and restaurants and places where folks don't need to drive out in order to shop. So they can stay in the city, drive less, and also keep those dollars in the city. So that aligns really well, I think, with some of your very near-term goals to expand economic development. Let me keep going on here. Clean fuels and electric vehicles. Yes, sir.
Quick question. As a quick matter of background, about 7:10 this morning, I got on the freeway westbound to go to Issaquah, and I saw 9 cars.
Yes.
Do you think that I realize 2 things? We're not going to be like we are now forever, but we may also not be like we were ever. And I've heard things about carbon emissions in China and all over the world that are like you can see the Himalayas for the first time in centuries or whatever. Do you feel like there are opportunities for your group and others to sort of jump on the opportunity we've been given from this standpoint to, as we go back, do we now know that more people are capable of working from home, and therefore maybe transportation needs to become different?
That's a great question. It's something we've been wrestling with at the county, and especially as we were on our strategic climate action plan. We were so close, and then the COVID-19 hit, and we're all still trying to figure out what are the medium and long-term impacts. I think there is a lot of opportunity to rethink teleworking and commuting. I know that what I don't want is that economy versus environment. I think that we need to make sure that we can enjoy clean air without tanking our economy, which is, we're doing that now, and that's unfortunate. We do have clean air, but we're doing it as a side impact of pandemic control. But I think it's woken. I can just speak anecdotally that for some of our county leadership, several department directors were not supportive of telecommuting and people working at home before, and now they are. They said, I've seen it work. We had to do it in an emergency, but I know now that I think we can have a lot more flexibility in there. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really think about how do we use this event and the economic impacts to really create jobs and grow out of this in a clean energy way. I'm super optimistic on it. I think there's a lot of hurdles, and we have a long way to go, but I think it's something that if we take the right steps, we can get there. Let's see. me talk about, as clean fuels and electric vehicles. So this is one that we pulled out of transportation land use just because of the proliferation of electric vehicle options, and have some pretty ambitious goals here to increase use of electric vehicles such that 100% of light duty vehicles and at least 60% of medium duty and 40% of heavy duty are electric by 2050. Understand right now there's not a lot of options for medium and heavy duty electric vehicles, but setting that target. And so the policy commitment on that is to enact local code and programs to incent or require electric vehicle charging within buildings or on development sites. And it sounds like that's part of your comprehensive plan, and you have that opportunity to really increase your EV charging. I know you've got some EV advocates on your council there.
Councilmember Shepherd?
Yeah, a question about similar to the EV vehicle. We also have some fuel that's being generated by our waste treatment plant, and I'm wondering if you're capturing that as well.
Oh, absolutely. So the wastewater treatment plant, that fuel is currently being used for a variety of different things, and a lot of it is for transportation related fuel. In the long term, what we would love to see, or actually in the shorter term, love to see a clean fuel standard that would really incent the development of that type of biogas and other type of renewable fuels that would definitely count for alternative fuels.
Just a quick point of clarification. That's a King County wastewater treatment plant, not the Snoqualmie wastewater treatment facility. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Shepherd?
Another add-on question, I guess, as far as solid waste and incinerators, what is your position on that?
So
Rachel, I'm just,
yeah.
we're running way over time tonight, so I'm just gonna respectfully ask the council if we could just allow Rachel to kind of stick to the K4C presentation, unless Rachel, you feel you have a really brief. That's a pretty big topic in itself.
That is a big topic, and it's one that I am not super an expert on. I know there's a lot of different options out there. I'll touch a little bit on consumption and materials management in a slide or two, if we can wait on there, and it might answer your questions.
That would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I do want to just go real quickly. Energy supply. This one, what we added in here was to add the Washington State Clean Energy Transformation Act, which was signed into law in the 2019 session. So just bringing those goals in to have 100% clean electricity supply by 2045. And also working towards an advanced grid that uses deep energy efficiency and peak management of peak demands. Project or program is to participate in utility integrated resource plans, which is their 20-year planning cycle. This is actually one of those examples of where the group working together can share knowledge. So it's part of my scope of work on a regular basis to attend these meetings and these processes and other utility dockets for our utilities, PSE and Seattle City Light. So I'm able to do this, and I bring back the knowledge and any type of actions that we can take to the K4C steering committee and to members of the outreach committee. So that not every, I know Nicole's actually, she's joined me on a couple of these meetings, and it's been wonderful to have her, but it's something, if you don't have the bandwidth, that's something that I can bring to the group as a whole. Keep going. Green building and energy efficiency. This again is looking for strong efficiency standards in the existing building stock, and also to promote really green development in new buildings. The thing that is new in this section is to support the transition to electrical systems to reduce natural gas and other fossil fuel use in existing buildings by at least 20% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And we're really talking about conservation, the use of renewable natural gas, and electrification. The other thing that's in here also is starting to talk about water consumption and the use of building materials with low carbon emissions, so the carbon emissions that were used to develop it. So this one, is, like, again, on this one, we were really active this past Washington State Building Code Council cycle for residential and commercial codes. So we have acted on this to support state legislation that advances conversion to clean energy sources and efficiency and strong building codes for folks. You know, it not only saves resources, but it saves money, it improves household resilience against utility bill shocks. So there's a lot more to that than just energy efficiency. I'm going to jump to consumption and materials management, looking for a really high recycling rate of 70% and the zero waste of resources by 2030. This is something we're trying to figure out how to do. This is looking to develop a regional strategy through the adopted 2019 Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan. And the idea here, council member, is looking to extend the life of the landfills. I believe it's for another 20 years, but I am not an expert on solid waste. So this is the framework here that we've adopted through the joint commitments with respect to waste management. And with forest and farming, again, not a lot of changes on this one, just updating it to bring in the land conservation initiative and the countywide 30-year forest plan. You know, really the idea here is to preserve the local beauty that we have here in the trees and to have urban forestry goals to preserve all of that. The other thing is really to expand our local food economy. That's been an initiative through the local food initiative through the county, supporting the agricultural element of our county, working to create farmers markets and create, you know, more opportunity there. So not a lot of change in that one. Just a couple more here. Government operations. This is to develop operational greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that support shared countywide goals and implement actions that reduce each partner greenhouse gas footprint. The city of Snoqualmie has already taken many of these steps. You have both some streetlight replacement, you have solar, you have a very efficient city hall, you have enrolled in Green Direct. So you've done a lot of this. You're already walking the talk, as we would say. And then the last one, this is a new one, this is climate preparedness. And this is, again, looking to increase community resilience by planning and preparing for the impacts of climate change on K4C communities and the King County region. There's a lot of work to be done on this. We're really developing this out now, but we're really working to harden our infrastructure so that the cities and the county can provide essential services and keep our residents safe. So I know that's important to everyone. So that was all those were all the sections that we're going through. If we have time for a couple of questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions, Council? Councilmember Holloway or Mayhew? We don't see you two.
Mayor, Councilmember Mayhew, I just, our council or our community may not be aware that one of the ways that we support K4C is through the time of our staff members. So we on the council are all used to hearing Nicole's name mentioned with respect to this topic, but she's actually here as actually in the role she plays, right, for the K4C. And maybe you could just mention that, Mayor?
Yeah, Rachel, did you want to speak to Nicole's role?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Nicole is actually the co-chair of the K4C. She and my colleague Matt Kuharek at the county really run the staff operations of the K4C. So they manage the meetings, they plan out much of our work, do a lot of communications. Nicole has been a really key element to the success of the K4C in the past couple of years.
Great, thank you. Yeah, when we joined the K4C some years ago, we were one of the voices that really influenced a lot of the policies and strategies here, making sure it wasn't a one-size-fit-all, that there were distinct differences between small communities versus larger cities. And it was really our goal to set Snoqualmie apart as kind of a leader for smaller communities on some of these efforts, because many small communities did sort of feel like, oh, leave it to the big cities. We don't do that. We've tried to be a presence that encouraged others to be involved. I think we successfully sort of carved out that role and are often turned to by the county and others in the area to speak to that. What's before you tonight is basically again, because we're recognizing that some of the details, policies, and strategies have changed, and many of the elected officials have changed since the last time the letters of commitment were, the joint commitments were signed onto, that there should be a refresh. But before I re-signed that, I wanted to make sure that the current council, because we've had quite a bit of change too, was not objecting for continuing to play that role in K4C or be part of this partnership. So did you have more slides, Rachel, or have you pretty much wrapped it up? Yeah.
No, sir, that's it.
All right. All right. So if there's no objections, council, I will proceed to re-sign us to this. Again, these are not legally required actions. This is all aspirational, and so it's entirely up to the city council when you, or any initiatives that we decide to implement internally or within our city limits that have any costs connected to those. It's entirely in the council's purview to accept or deny those suggestions or initiatives on an individual basis. All right, Rachel, thank you so much for your time and your incredible patience tonight as we got off to a little bit of a stumbly start. And at least your commute home will be pretty easy.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And you know, the last thing I want to leave with is that the beauty of the K4C also is that everybody has an equal voice. So I think Mayor Larson mentioned it, but you know, Snoqualmie's voice is just as large as King County's and just as large as Seattle. So that's a thing that's really nice too about it. You make a big impact. All right, I'm going to, do I just give up control?
I think it'll be taken from you momentarily, so you
Okay,
don't.
great.
Yeah, but thanks again.
So
again, council, if there's no objections or further questions, then I just know I'll proceed to inform or send a signed recommitment to the K4C and Rachel in the coming week.
Great.
All right, thanks again. So with that, I don't see any citizens that have managed to log into the meeting. Staff, could you please notify me if you've noticed any citizens? I don't know if we could even give them a voice to say, hey, I'm here, I'd like to speak. Can someone confirm, Andy or Kevin or someone?
We have a Jaylon Johnson in the attendees group.
Oh, okay, great. Jaylon, can we turn him on or can he turn himself on?
I thought we weren't taking public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right, we suspended, so.
We spent the first 27 minutes discussing there, no worries.
Right, yeah, sorry. Okay, thanks for reminding me. Sorry, Jaylon.
I love Joe, but yeah.
Yeah, Joe's got our phone number, so he can always call and let us know what he thinks. So, all right. So with that, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. All items listed below being actioned by one motion. Action items include minutes for the April 13th, 2020 Roundtable and regular city council meeting, and that's pretty much it. So, do I have a motion, council?
So moved.
Second.
All right. I have a motion, a second to approve the minutes for the last meetings. Any discussion? All right. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on to Community Development Committee, Agenda Bill 20040, ordinance imposing a sales and use tax to fund investments in affordable and supportive housing, authorized by Substitute House Bill 1406, Chapter 338, Laws of 2019, codified as RCW 822.14.540, adding a new Chapter 3.03 to the Snoqualmie Municipal Code, providing for severability and effective date and other matters related thereto. This was introduced on the 13th and is ready for action tonight.
So you just read it. Do you want me to read it?
If you could read the motion, yeah. Well, I guess you have to read, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No. The summary statement was already read in, so if you could just go read the motion, please.
Right.
And the ordinance number is 1232.
442?
1232, 1232.
Okay. Move to adopt 1232, imposing a sales and use tax to fund investments in affordable and supportive housing, authorized by Substitute House Bill 1406, Chapter 338, Laws of 2019, codified as RCW 822.14.540, adding a new Chapter 3.03 to the Snoqualmie Municipal Code, providing for severability and effective date and other matters related thereto.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 1232 as stated by Councilmember Ross. Is there any discussion, council? Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I wonder, Mayor, if we could ask the city attorney to just, I believe it's a brief item just to explain to us what the guidance is for us taking up a matter, and if there's any determination we need to make as a council that this is an appropriate action for us to take under the guidance. Maybe he could just tell us what it is we need to do so that we're clear on our action.
All right, Bob. Bob, you want to give a quick summary again?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And what Councilmember Mayhew is referring to is a matter that was brought up earlier in the meeting, and that is the governor's proclamation having to do with the Open Public Meetings Act, which suspends certain of the requirements of the act. Am I speaking loud enough? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
It's okay. Certain of the requirements about providing facilities for people to attend in person, and then during the COVID-19 emergency, and then also says because of those changes that it purports to say that local governments can't take any action that's not either related to the COVID-19 emergency or that is, and I'm using air quotes here, necessary and routine. The thinking being, I believe, that local governments would either be dealing with the emergency or doing things that they had to do and that were not so unusual and unexpected that citizens who weren't paying attention might not be caught unawares. And some members of the Sound Cities Association had followed, and others had followed up with the governor's office about how that determination was to be made. And representatives from the governor's office, including from the governor's general counsel office, indicated that that was a discretionary determination that each local government should make when it was going forward with meetings. This item in particular, as has been indicated, is necessary in that it is a requirement of the statute. If the city of Snoqualmie is going to avail itself of the state sales tax credit, it's a requirement that you pass an ordinance like this. And passage of ordinance is obviously a routine item for the council. And in fact, this item itself is relatively routine and has been on the council's agenda quite a number of times going back more than 6 months. So ultimately, of course, this is a determination for the council to make. I think in past, on some of the council agendas, we've included some notation indicating certain items were, but if council wants to discuss and council indicate a consensus that it is or is not necessary and routine, that it would be appropriate for the council record to reflect that. And so I'll stop now.
Do we need to do that as a separate determination, or is just the fact that we move forward with this item does that automatically encapsulate that decision?
Well, I think arguably the latter, but certainly clarity is always helpful. And given that questions were raised in this particular meeting, maybe council would want to, as part of a motion or its discussion, indicate its determination on the question.
Councilmember Ross, Councilmember Sunwell.
So we intentionally moved it to this meeting rather than waiting until July so that we can start getting the sales tax credit from the state. And it's about $20,000 per year for 20 years. By getting it now, we can actually start applying it to different areas of affordable housing, which could be rental assistance, or to the homeless shelter, or to other areas that right now is in crisis. And so this will allow us to start using that funding.
Councilor Sunwell.
Yeah, I'll go a step further. I think given the fallout that many expect, and not only fallout that is going on, I cannot think of two things we could do more urgently than adopt this and adopt the domestic violence bill that's coming up here in a few minutes. I can't think of anything more relevant that we could be doing. So I'm fully supportive of this.
All right, any other questions or discussion, council? All right, hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Councilmember Shepherd, you're muted.
No?
So the motion passes. All right, moving on to Public Safety Committee, Agenda Bill 20036, ordinance prohibiting exposure of minor children to domestic violence. This was introduced in the 13th, is ready for action tonight. And again, if you could just read the motion, please. Ordinance number 1233.
I'm not sure.
1233. Councilmember Jesus, do you want someone else?
Proposed ordinance.
I think you wanted it made bigger, not smaller.
Continue, please.
The proposed ordinance is intended to protect minor children from exposure to domestic violence. Recommended action: move to approve ordinance adopting section 9 exposing minor children to domestic violence and providing for severability from the effective date.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion, a second to approve ordinance number 1233 as stated by Councilmember Jeans and seconded by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any discussion, council?
So this has been discussed at the committee level. It's been discussed at the last council meeting. It has the broad support of the city attorney, the city prosecutor, and the chief of police. I think it's an appropriate thing to go forward, and sooner is better than later.
All right. You're going to share the milk there, Councilmember Simo? Oh, water. Okay.
You think it's water?
Yeah. All right. Any other discussion, council, or questions? I do concur with Councilmember Sunwall that this is, I can't think of a couple more pertinent given all the folks staying home, that we did anticipate a rise in domestic violence issues, and as I think there has been. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. All right, moving on to ordinances and reports. Well, I'm going to just do a quick round on committees to see if there's reports and committees, and we'll come back to mayor's report, and we'll kind of tuck that conversation within the committee of the whole as well. So is there any other report for Parks and Public Works Committee?
None.
Community Development Committee report?
No report.
All right. This might be a good time, Mark Hoffman, if with the chair of the committee, you want to speak to the mill site or give any report on that?
Thank you, Mayor. No report, but just a reminder that it is a quasi-judicial land use application. Any update is that today is day one of the publication of the draft EIS. We are going for a 45-day review and comment period for public and agencies. We're going to collect all those comments and they will be responded to after the comment period is over.
And I understand that the 45 days is actually 15 days longer than the typical 30 days per the applicant's request, given the COVID crisis and they wanted to give more additional opportunities for comment, did they not?
That's correct. We received that letter from the applicant.
All right, Councilmember Shepherd.
What is the process if somebody wants to appeal this?
On the website, gotta read it.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Can you give us any information here?
I'm going to indulge it momentarily. I do it, but again, this is sort of a time for reports from committees. Well, I suppose it's fine if Councilman wants to discuss the issues. Bob Sturbank, did you want to speak to that?
Just with a clarifying question, you said appeal this. What is the this?
I think she's talking about the draft environmental impact statement.
Right.
So there is no process to appeal a draft environmental impact statement. On the Planning Commission and under the law that pertains to SEPA, DEISs are not appealable, period. under the law that pertains to SEPA, it is possible for a city to have an administrative appeal process that would address a final environmental impact statement. City of Snoqualmie does not have such a process, although that topic has been introduced to the Planning Commission and may be making its way to the council for subsequent consideration. That's not pertaining directly to the mill site, but would pertain to the SEPA appeal process generally. And short of that, right now, under the existing city code, an environmental impact statement is not appealable administratively. The only avenue to address those decisions is in a timely appeal of the underlying permit decision to Superior Court.
Where is this? Where is this on our website? As far as this information, as far as the process.
I'm sorry, which process?
Let's say the draft EIS and the subsequent processes. Where would somebody find that if they wanted to find out what the process is?
Mark, do you want to speak to that?
The action that we're under, or the period that we're under, should be there. It's in the notice. It's very specific. The notice, the cover letter, the draft EIS. It's a review and comment period on the draft EIS. If the council member is asking for what happens after, we could certainly add some procedural information to the project page so that people know that once they comment and the comment period closes, what to expect comes after. We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayhem.
Yeah, just maybe we get a clarification, maybe it's from the city attorney or from Mr. Hoffman. I just heard mention a few minutes ago that this is a quasi-judicial process. I know that some council members are making public statements about it. Is that something we should or should not be doing when it's quasi-judicial? What are the limitations that we would be under given that this is quasi-judicial?
Or what is the personal exposure of a council member if they're not respecting the quasi-judicial process?
That's probably a topic better addressed either in an executive session, or I can send some attorney-client privilege guidance to individual council members.
Right. Okay. Any other items for Community Development Committee? I take it not. Finance Administration Committee report.
Yeah, move to approve claims for the period March 27th, 2020 to April 13th, 2020 as presented in the Finance Director's claims approval report.
Second.
Motion a second to approve warrants as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Thank you for remembering that. Any further discussion? Councilmember Shepherd, I'm sorry, I'm going to give the chair the opportunity to speak first, and then we'll go to Councilmember Shepherd.
Just to report to the council, in compliance with the revised procedures for reviewing warrant or claims, the F&A committee members reviewed the revised procedures for the duration of the emergency. The F&A committee members reviewed the claims, discussed any questions they had with Finance Director, and recommended approval of the claims as recommended by the Finance Director in the report.
All right, Councilmember Shepherd.
So the current procedure that the F&A committee is using does not allow other council members to review what the F&A committee has reviewed.
All right, any further discussion or questions, council? All right, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, motion passes 6-1. All right, any other report for F&A?
No further report.
Public Safety Committee report.
No report.
All right, and then we move on to Committee of the Whole. And actually, it kind of in the context that I'm going to do a mayor's report, I was asked, we had a great conversation about sort of needs in the community at the F&A committee. And I think kind of a strategy that we were delineating would be necessary is one for us to continue to do an analysis on what might be the impacts to the city. Before we throw considerable sums of money at needs in the community, we have to sort of get our ducks in a row to make sure we're not suddenly faced with layoffs or severe cuts within the city. Otherwise, we won't be able to attend to the needs of the community in the coming year or more. So that's kind of the first protocol. And then secondly is looking at the needs of the most of the social service agencies and then other nonprofits needs in the community. I was asked to comment on why is it that Snoqualmie might be better positioned than other neighboring communities to actually do more assistance to our community. And in light of hearing stories like Issaquah being facing with some staffing cuts right now, and North Bend might be facing the same. So just very, very high levels, so distinctly, I wanted to make 2 points that make that distinction. One is the tax base. It's very critical to look at communities what their tax bases are. We've been aspiring to diversify our revenue sources, and that's a kind of a great, healthy place to be, but because of our heavy reliance on things like property taxes, and the second major source of taxes for us is taxes on utilities. The downside of that heavy dependence, of course, is more pressure on residents during, throughout any given year. The upside of it is when you hit a great recession or a COVID crisis, it's nice to have a heavy reliance on very stable revenue sources versus communities like Issaquah or North Bend, where most of their revenue comes from sales and B&O taxes. And so those communities are hit far more severely from a crisis like this than we are. So that is what, and then secondly, we have also, because of the unique nature of the Snoqualmie Ridge development and the fact that the council for some close to 15 years was having the goals were to wean ourselves off of one-time revenues and live on a sustainable ongoing revenues. There was an opportunity to put aside some healthy emergency operational and rainy day reserves, which we could tap into and use and for mostly capital purposes. If there's one area that we will definitely probably suffer from, it's having to go back to our non-utility capital improvement plan and have to make some sacrifices here, which includes maybe even the community center has to be really evaluated as to whether that's something that can go forward and have to use resources otherwise we use for those types of things. So again, it's those reserves, it's our tax base, and the last thing I wanted to note was the fact that we're very much more of, you look at the demographic of our community, the preponderance of our workforce is more white collar management workforce, not so much hourly work or blue collar, and so the majority of our citizens have not been impacted as much by losing jobs and us losing revenue as a consequence of them losing jobs. And so we've sort of been buffered on a number of fronts in that regard. I mean, the upside, it's not that we won't have impacts, but the upside is we will be in a position to assist some agencies. So with that as a preface, the last thing I was asked to do was to kind of go through an overview to give a council the overview of what the staff and what we've been doing for the past few weeks responding to the COVID crisis specifically. So I'll get to that in a moment. I see Councilmember Shepherd has been patiently holding her hand up, and I'll take that question first.
So the statement that the city of Snoqualmie is in a good financial position, but we're looking at slides that talk about a financial cliff when we talk about budget. So we're looking at over the next several years, we're going to be underwater several $1 million. So I don't understand why we think that we shouldn't look at trying to, for cost savings. We haven't had any presentation as far as looking at how much we spend on our contractors.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Words are super important. The mayor did not say we're in a good position. He said we're in a better position. It's a comparative one. So it's silly to think that we're in a good position. And secondly, what we all agreed to several weeks ago with this roundtable format is we weren't yet going to get into the conversations about cuts and things. It's coming. But go back and look at what we approved several weeks ago about how we're going to do this. And that's why we haven't gotten there yet.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not muted. I would say that I was in the meeting from 6 to 7 o'clock, and there most certainly was a discussion of that would cover topics, levels of service, which encompasses the notion of if you're looking to cut levels of service, if you're looking to cut costs, these departmental presentations are the very presentations you have to then determine that. So we heard, about what would happen if we were looking to cut firemen, or what would happen if we were looking to cut policemen, and we understood. They went through with us why we have the staffing levels we have. So these are the very conversations about levels of service. So if those aren't the conversations we're supposed to be having, and that we all intended to have, then I throw up my hands. I don't know what the heck it is that you're wanting to hear, because these seem to me to be exactly the presentations I think the city ought to be giving us.
Councilmember Shepherd, let's just go one more question here. I'm just trying to give a quick report so we can get back to letting Chief Phipps finish his presentation.
So in looking at Issaquah's presentation, as far as cutting costs, it had nothing to do with cutting back on firefighters and police officers. It had to do with cutting back on their largest expenses, which was their vendors. So that's the kind of conversation I'd like our city to have.
Thank you, and we'll eventually get there. Councilor Mayhew, real quickly.
Well, I really hope that we don't spend time talking about Issaquah's problems and how they're solving their problems, because they're not our problems.
Okay, so with that, Council, I want to give an opportunity for the staff. I've given them a list of different categories, starting off with Mark Carrera and kind of talking about, and again, just a few minutes each on overall coordination efforts and city response, both internal and external, to the crisis. I'll turn it to Robert for, well, maybe it's a little premature and and too complicated, from really high level estimated financial impacts to the city and community. Social service needs will kick over to Jake Fouts. Business community needs and impacts, and what Nicole's been doing in that regard to address that, along with some great work from the Chamber and Kelly and Earl. And then residential and commercial construction, Mark Hoffman was going to talk briefly about that. We probably don't need to talk much about that. Much that was resolved with the governor's loosening that up last week, and so that solved a lot of problems. I was going to speak to some nonprofit impacts, and then Joan and some of her works with communications and community resources, and then Perry on any enforcement issues and perhaps IT as well. We're in the thick of IT things, but we'll keep working on that. Mark, do you want to cue us up real quick?
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Mark Herrera again. So I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what we've been doing in the city from the city's perspective related to this event. Early on, we opened our EOC and began remotely opened our EOC and began information and warning, getting the news out to the public as soon as we can. Joan was handling that through the PIO channels. And then we started meeting with the Emergency Management Committee and keeping the mayor and the city administrator informed of how this was evolving. You may recall that obviously the mayor and Rick both were out ill. So right around that same time, we had gone to working remotely as well in the city. So as we migrated into that position, we continued to monitor the event, continue to keep the city informed and the public informed, and then make decisions as they came forward. We've been working remotely for the last probably 3 weeks to a month, and it's been working out fairly well. We've had to work through a couple little hiccups, but we've established policies to get us through that. And then as recently as last week, we began planning to return to work. So with the governor's orders being lifted now, or some of them being slowly lifted, we felt that it was prudent for us to begin those efforts and begin planning to return to work. We've established a work group internally that's been doing that planning. We had a meeting this morning, so we continue to plan for that. And as the opportunity presents itself, and as the governor continues to lift the order, then we'll begin reoccupying City Hall. We'll begin making the space available to the public. We'll begin, again, allowing the rooms to be rented out. But similar to the governor's order, it's likely this will be a dial versus a switch. But we will definitely keep you all informed about that. Some other things that we've been doing, we've been hosting a weekly human and social services call, which Jake will talk about here in a little bit. But that's been very informative. Not having an internal department that really works with those services and relying on nonprofits, it's really valuable for us to have that weekly coordination call so that we're all singing from the same sheet of music. Similarly, we've been participating on county calls as well, county EOC calls, and I know all the staff internally and the mayor have been also working on other calls. So we've been culminating the information. A lot of our focus internally has been on PPE for the emergency responders and for our essential staff workers, but then also looking at policies that affect the city's continuity of government, and then also how we proceed. One of the things in FEMA they talk about is a whole community approach, and we've certainly have done that with our Monday conference calls with the nonprofits, the communities of faith, and then the chamber and other groups as well. So with that, I can certainly answer any questions that you may have, and if not, then I'll hand it off to Robert to move on to the next piece. Okay, no questions. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Robert Hamoud, again, Finance Director. To the mayor's point a little bit, there's a lot of moving pieces to the shutdown. The governor made some orders today, in addition to the construction order that was lifted last week, that will play into our forecast at the city. Primarily the fact that the resumption of golf next week, obviously I think that'll come to a relief to the club on the Ridge, also to the Mount Si golf course. So obviously that's good because that attracts people to the community. Same thing with the reopening, at least with social distancing of the state parks. I know there were some overcrowding issues before, but the state parks and tourism and even people driving through town, that's gonna increase now, especially as the weather gets warmer and some of the social distancing restrictions and some of the trailhead closures are lifted. That is going to have an impact on the community. How much is it? It's hard to tell. It just depends on what people's behavior and habits are. I would assume that, there's a lot of people, my wife and myself included, that have pent-up demand for outdoor recreation. And so I think we'll see, hopefully a spillover into the takeout orders for our local businesses. And even some of the traffic returning to the downtown area. So right now, what we've decided is we still don't have sales tax data for March because, again, we have estimates of what we lost in March, but we lag 2 months behind on the data we received from the state. So we should be receiving that data it's the first week of May. We've tentatively scheduled a financial forecast update for the last council meeting in May at this point. So that's what we're aiming for. But again, there's nothing like, we're not Issaquah. I'm going to say it again, just because of our mix of businesses, as the mayor's point, is different than many other cities in the region. We don't have big box stores that are closed. We don't have auto dealerships. We just have a different mix of businesses. And so looking at our business mix, we did some estimates for the shutdown. Again, we do think there's going to be several $100,000 of losses, but not in the millions at this point. If you remember some of my previous forecasts, one of the benefits that we're seeing is a resumption of construction. I think our biggest concern really was that capital revenue. And I think at least on community development revenues, we're hearing, and Mark Hoffman, I know, will speak a little bit to the resumption of construction. Most of the projects will have fully restored revenue. So pretty much our original forecast on CD and on one-time sales tax construction revenues, assuming the rest of the construction season goes without any additional stoppages, should be coming back to normal, at least somewhat a resemblance of normal if there's full resumption of construction. The one wild card on one-time revenues we're talking about, that is still REIT. The home market still looks very sluggish. That could last months, if not years. We're not sure at this point. So again, we'll have some better data next month. I don't want to give out figures now because they're going to change. But again, we're monitoring and we're seeing what the recent impact will have driving local traffic, if any, of the restrictions that'll lift on Monday. And that's all I have for now, unless there's any questions from the council. Mayor, I don't hear any questions.
Hurry, Mayor.
Mr. Hammoud, do you know who was going to present following you?
I'm sorry, guys. I'm the one messing up. I was muted this whole time. I'm wondering why Jake went. I said,
Mayor, you've never sounded.
Robert, I didn't see any hands go up, so I was moving on to Jake Fouts, and I kept saying Jake, Jake, Jake. So anyway, I'm the one that was messing up. Sorry about that. Jake, if you could go ahead and speak to the social service needs.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Council, this is Jake Fouts, Fire Captain. I was just a couple of weeks ago appointed as Branch Director for the Health and Social Services Branch under the EOC for the city. And our primary purpose and objective was to make sure that we coordinate our social and health and social needs programs on behalf of the city, making sure that we're following through with any kind of plans to help with the recovery of the nonprofits, as well as making sure that the nonprofits aren't necessarily duplicating efforts and that their needs are being reached to the maximum citizen count that we possibly can. Additionally, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're also trying to make sure that we're communicating a message that is being shared throughout the entire valley, because, you know, as the mayor mentioned earlier and several others have alluded to, that this is not just a Snoqualmie Valley issue, or a city of Snoqualmie issue, this is a Snoqualmie Valley issue, one that we're all in this together, and that even though we have our specific needs up here in the city, the needs are being felt through the entire valley, and whatever affects the valley also affects us. So with that being said, we have been hosting weekly Monday morning meetings, conference calls with various different city staff, hosted primarily by the fire chief and the mayor. And this is geared towards the social needs for the community. So Snoqualmie Valley Network, organizations of faith, food banks, people who need assistance to get their nonprofit up and running, and then other organizations that can support those nonprofits to help with the social needs throughout our community. So we have those Monday morning conference calls, and anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours, just depending on the needs. And what we're seeing is that really the Snoqualmie Valley as a whole has embraced this on a large part that really rivals anywhere else in the Pacific Northwest. Many of the other communities surrounding us throughout the Puget Sound are struggling tenfold compared to what we are for nonprofit needs, for social service needs, and for just general needs of keeping people afloat while they're out of work. And as the mayor alluded to, we do have a slightly less impact on the social side, as many of our residents are still employed, they're still working from home, they have the finances to get through. However, we are seeing that with the added burden of having the kids at home full time, you know, there are programs that are suffering a little bit with, such as the backpack programs that feed kids over the weekend, that they can take a bag of food home that provides lunches and snacks and breakfast foods to be able to carry them through the weekend to help support some of those needs that come through their families. So we've been working to make sure that we coordinate some of these efforts. One of the things that we're doing is we're providing a hot sheet for all of our communication channels that identifies what the immediate needs are for the week. And those are being communicated almost immediately out to our social media networks, the email blast, the ROA, all the different organizations that help support us. And I got to give some credit to Emily at Love Snoqualmie Valley, which is sponsored by Snoqualmie Valley Alliance. She does an incredible job of trying to spotlight organizations in need on our website. And we've been trying to coordinate communications between Emily with Love Snoqualmie and with our own communications department to make sure that we have that coordinated message that says the same thing and that we're not working against each other, which is really what our branch is about. A couple of things that have popped up in recent requests is that there's specific needs that are coming out of some of these organizations, including the backpack programs, the food programs, basic needs such as having enough grocery bags to be able to distribute food. So the city is working on coordinating a bag drive to get bags for them. We're working with the Snoqualmie Firefighters Association to coordinate a food drive to help benefit these organizations. And then we're also looking at the social piece of it, people that have been locked up, cooped up in their house for a long period of time, and how can we make sure that their spirits are lifted and know that people are still thinking about them. And this is something that we're working with the Mount Si Senior Center to help support. And that's more of a feel-good thing. And you'll see some more reports coming out on that likely in the next 2 weeks. As part of the Health and Social Services branch, we have a team of staff members that are working with us, specifically geared towards financing and grants and looking at ways to help support these organizations. So we've taken and we're looking 3 different directions with this team, with primary focus being on how can we get nonprofit funding, how can we get funding for our small businesses to be able to return to work and help them through some of these federal and state programs that are coming out. And then we also have one of our grants and finance members who is working diligently to see where there's revenues available that the city might be able to access as well to help support programs as we move forward into what we consider our new normal. So we have various different things at work in the finance and grant side, and I really couldn't do half of the communications without their support. Specific requests that have come in as of late, we've had a request for financial assistance, which has been forwarded to our Human Services Director for consideration, and then along to the mayor, which they are working through now, specifically to help stabilize fundings for programs. And then we also have recently had a request for personnel assistance to help support food programs as well. And we are working through our emergency management division for providing CERT personnel, which are our volunteers. CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team, which is a program started by FEMA to get community members more involved with providing help to their own neighbors. While there is a bit of a staff component to help support the program, this is largely done through volunteer work. And we actually have a joint program with the city of North Bend. So we're working through those issues right now, likely to start deploying CERT members starting the beginning of May. As for specific needs for our program, the biggest need for us is just the continued staff support, which city admin and emergency management has been incredible with. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
So the question, I'll just add detail. The senior center is the one that has come forward with a specific ask of monetary ones going in a range, and correct me, Jake, I think it's 8 to or up to 16,000 or more. I am comfortable with providing at least an $8,000 assistance to them right now. Councilmember Mayhew and others had, I think, I sent you that information sort of anticipating that this would be my recommendation, or what I hope to do to act quickly. And I'd rather start with the lower number or the lower amount. And again, because it's when you assess the numbers, you know, we're 18% of our residents is what they really serve. And so whether you did it on a longer term projection through the year, that would be about a $10,000 here from us. I think with what we have enough information now that even with a further evaluation, I think $8,000 is a fair and proportionate contribution from Snoqualmie. We can always then refine that analysis more and determine if there's more money they need later that we're comfortable giving them. So at this point, I'm just looking for if there's any objection from the council and moving forward in that in the coming week to provide that funding. Okay, I'll see that as a concurrence. And so with that, if there are any other questions on the social service needs, Bob Jeans, was that a hand wave or hand up?
Actually, thank you very much. Actually, I'm thinking about your request for $8,000. It seems to me we have a committee that gets together almost once a year, and all the community needs out there. It's hotel motel taxes. It's that, but more than anything, it's a committee that looks at all kinds of needs, which Jake Faust just did a nice job of laying that out. There's a lot of groups probably with needs. We probably ought to get a committee together, or a council committee, someone to sort of bring together all those kinds of things, sort of with, maybe with Jake's leadership, instead of, rather than do a piecemeal starting with the senior center, take a look at all the kinds of things, thinking about those that contribute to the citizens of Snoqualmie.
And I'm happy to do that, Councilmember Jeans. My only concern is the risk might be that it would, 1 week would drag into 2 and then 3 or 4 weeks before a decision is made. I would defer to Deborah Vigil or Councilmember Mayhew, who is the liaison to the Human Services Advisory Committee. Part of our intent when standing up an internal group with Jake leading that effort would be, again, to have the staff do some of that vetting on those needs prior to bringing any sort of recommendation to me. I have Councilmember Shepherd's hands up, so we'll go there and Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay, so the only concern I have is that we don't have a fix on where the city is going to be as far as finances. And I think that the senior center is a worthy cause. But I worked in a city at one point where there was so many different worthy causes that you have to kind of put things into perspective as far as who else going to need this help and how much do we want to spend in general. And I know that we did, Councilmember Mayhew did a good job on sussing that out, but I feel like we're kind of getting into how deep are we getting? And I'm a little concerned about that.
Councilmember Mayhew?
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Shepherd on that point, and I think perhaps that's what Councilmember Jeans was getting at, which is, I think, Mayor, you've made some moves on the Snoqualmie Valley Shelter, and you're talking about an $8,000 move with the senior center, and I mean, my sense of the council, although I haven't talked to other council members about it, but my sense is people can see. I think we can see that immediate need, and in those dollar amounts for those very obvious needs, I don't think there's any objection, and I think we all are comfortable with you proceeding. But as you talk about larger amounts and more organizations, I think there's a sense. I certainly share the concern that I heard from the 2 council members that just spoke, that maybe we need to get a sense of how big this is, how long it might go, what kind of dollars are we talking about? Because we're not careful, those funds that you spoke about earlier that this city has been wise enough to put us aside could run off and then we could not have that anymore and still need it. So maybe I don't know that we necessarily, I don't defer to the other council members, but I don't know that we necessarily want to vet each request. I think you're right. The amount of time that would take is not consistent with an emergency, and we're talking about emergency funding. But at the same time, maybe something that looks at a broader guideline or something to sort of make everyone, including you, comfortable that we have some guidelines around this maybe is a wise thing to do.
Councilmember Ross, did you have your hand up?
I do. So I guess from the other comments, I'm not quite sure if you guys are for or not willing to give them the $8,000 right now. We did a proclamation today. It's called Older Americans Month, and to me, these are people that have to stay sheltered because of the COVID, and they've had an increase of number of food deliveries to people in Snoqualmie and the whole valley, and they are in dire straits of financial because they don't have their thrift shop open, they can't do their fundraiser, things like that where they would normally get their funding from. So to me, I'm thinking $8,000 would go a long way in helping our residents.
Councilmember Holloway? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Councilmember Ross. Councilmember Ross, are you finished?
I am finished. Thank you.
Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Shepherd.
So I guess I'm going to talk as supportive. This is along the lines that we talked in FNA of sustenance, safety, and can't remember the other one. shelter. I mean, and this is not a large dollar figure. This is not going to break the bank at $8,000. We're not at that condition due to the work of your prior councils, I might add. So I'm in full support of you doing this, Matt.
All right, thank you. Councilor Shepherd.
Okay, so the other thing, point that I wanted to make is that I think that the senior center can get money from a bailout for the COVID-19 federal funding. And I'm just wondering how urgent $8,000 is versus what is their immediate need. And I'm a little concerned about, when we look at who we're going to support, what other avenues do they have? We don't, as a city, we don't have those avenues.
So as Jake stated, the first protocol the staff follows is to pursue other people's money. That's probably the first three priorities. And then it's kind of shifting to, is there resources like personnel or others that we can provide? As a last resort, is there a monetary need that we need to fill? And even in that case, we're tracking those. And if there's some opportunity for us to have those reimbursed later, we will absolutely pursue those to reimburse the city for any expensive outlays to assisting agencies like the senior center in the future. But I think the council would agree that it's better that when the emergency and the need is there immediately, you address it and then try to pursue those monies later rather than waiting 2, 3, 4 months when those monies might become available and then be the conduit to provide it at that time.
Mayor, this is Sean. I have a comment.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the word emergency. I am stunned at some of the things I've heard today about what we need to wait and sit on for. I don't understand it. The 8,000 isn't going to be the end of their need. It's barely the start of their need. So I'm strongly in favor of doing this.
I guess having done this for a number of years, one thing I do know is that when we are already in our actions with, Jake said the feedback we're getting from others, like even our state representatives, are, wow, you guys are really doing phenomenal things in Snoqualmie Valley here. Lisa Callan was talking about that with Kelly Coughlin from the chamber. What Earl Bell has done, organizing meetings with the chamber, all the local businesses every Wednesday and Friday morning. What Mark Carrera's done with all the social service agencies, it's being noticed. And what that's buying is a tremendous amount of political capital. What I fear is if there's a perception that that the council or the mayor sits around and kind of dinkers around on a few $1,000s here and there, it has the opposite effect where that could come back to really, pay the consequences of that. So I think it's an opportunity for us to really step up and shine and buy a tremendous amount of political capital that will come back in spades in future years. And the community will reward us for that, I think, if we step up at that time of need. That's my little soapbox speech, I guess. Councilmember Jeans, Mayhew, and then Shepherd. I'm doing round robin, folks.
I agree with everyone who says this is a worthy cause and we can afford to do it, so let's do it. But it seems to me that it wouldn't be that much time to wait 2 weeks to see what we can find that are other community groups, other services that have needs, and then let's make a decision that $8,000 isn't a lot of money, but if the others are saying, well, you gave 8,000 here, you should give 2,000 there or 10,000 here. I mean, I hope that we could get a little more perspective on what the other needs are and sort of set a budget for what we're trying to do to help the community. And if it takes 2 weeks, I don't think there is that kind of an emergency that would be badly served by waiting 2 weeks.
Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I wasn't clear before. I am in favor of this $8,000. I am trying to be cautious about amounts beyond that. I'm for the $8,000 because of who it serves, the organization it's going to, and the amount we're talking about. But I just the number of incredibly important and valuable organizations in our community that are now severely impacted financially.
Mhm.
We do not have enough money in the city of Snoqualmie to fund all of that. We simply don't have that much money, not even close to that much money. So I think what the mayor laid out about how they're approaching this, how they're trying to leverage resources to help these organizations get resources, and putting our money in is only as a last resort. Well, there's a clear need. I think is absolutely the right approach. So I'm saying I do support this 8,000, but I'm just trying to sound a note of caution. We must be very careful about what else we fund and in what amounts. That's all I was trying to say.
All right. Thank you, Jim. That's clarification. I'll come back to that as we wrap this up. Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Holloway.
Okay, so I would be more inclined to have some, vote for it, if you will, if we had some maximum amount that we were going to spend and have some context of who all are we thinking we're going to bail out. Because right now, if you do it out of context, we have no idea how many requests we're going to get and how much each requester is going to escalate, how much they want from us. And I don't feel, we don't have monopoly money. So I'm very leery of it.
And here's what I can guarantee you right now. You will not get the information you need to make a decision. We are in an extremely highly fluid situation where those agencies, even one moment I could say the food bank needs some, oh, wait a minute, they just got a $50,000 grant from Seattle. They're good. I mean, things are just fluid and changing quickly. And even from, our situation and theirs. And so it's really a question of recognizing it's an unpredictable, ever fluid, rapidly changing situation. Do we want to play a role in trying to address anything, or do we just sort of stand back and wait till the dust settles and figure out at that time? Councilmember Holloway. You're muted, sir.
I'd like to remind council, this is, in this event, the most vulnerable community set we have. This fun little disease picks on the elderly like no other. Now, I have talked to one of the board members over at the community center, and just to give you an idea of things, they are coordinating bus service with the Snoqualmie Valley Service to get their members to grocery stores, to pharmacies as they need. Think it's a total appropriate service for us to support. They're working to get food to those who can't get out and get food. They're also working something we probably would have missed, community connections, so that some of their members don't go unnoticed when they drop off the radar. And if these aren't things we should be supporting, I'm confused what's going on here, guys. And $8,000 is not a lot of money. And Matt, you really don't need a vote from us. This is part of your powers in the emergency. I'd like us to move on.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Holloway. I mean, I'm glad you made that point for me. So that authority has been given to me. I'm just trying to be mindful, given that this is a kind of a solely unraveling emergency situation. So it's really unique in that regard. Here's what I'm going to propose, because unless I hear strong objections from the majority of the council, which I'm not hearing, and that's why I want to be respectful of the council, I'm going to move forward on recommending the $8,000 or approving the $8,000 on this. I absolutely hear the points that folks like Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Jeans are saying. I think we can do a better job of both having responding with speed and with further due diligence. But I need some assistance in doing that. So my recommendation is going to be taking the liaisons to some of these organizations. So, for example, Councilor Mayhew, you're a liaison to the Social Services or to the Human Services Advisory Committee. So I would like you to connect with key staff like Jake, and you guys brainstorm a way to tweak what he's already done so far, to just have a vetting system that works much more nimbly and quickly. And if that means engaging even some of the members of the Human Services Advisory Committee, that's fine. And I frankly don't even need to know the details. I just want some groups that are doing that work to then give me a recommendation on how I can act in a way that's more thoughtful. And again, we're going to have some budget challenges, but right now I'm comfortable with these numbers, like the Valley Shelter and the Senior Center. I mean, if we're saying in kind of the single digits of thousands, folks, Councilmember Holloway made a great point. If this is going to bust the bank and throw us off the rails, we have far more serious problems. We're not in a venue yet where that's going to become an issue. Now, with that said, there are going to be some that might push that threshold a little bit. Councilmember Lassay, you were a liaison to Northwest Railway Museum. I appreciated you were in their board meeting the other night, so you more than the rest of the council members understand some of the serious challenges they're facing. I think there's going to be numbers that I might recommend that we seriously consider providing assistance there that have as much to do with maybe revisiting a lack of contributions that we should have probably, or not contributions of an investment in their efforts that play directly into the millions of dollars of investments we've been making into downtown and downtown revitalization over the last several years. And to me, it's as much about correcting an appropriate contribution to that effort investment as it is about the COVID crisis. And if we could do it this time, that'd be good. So if you could maybe play a role in a similar fashion to get together with staff and vet out that particular issue. And Sean, you are, and Councilmember Lassay, I will absolutely come back to you in a moment. Last point I want to make is, Sean, you're the liaison to the Chamber of Commerce. They have an auction, a virtual auction coming up on May 1st. And depending on how well they do with that, there may be some financial assistance that would give them a great deal of take their stress level down. They have done a phenomenal job working with the business community. We'll have more numbers about how successful we've been with getting some of the businesses locally. The numbers of Snoqualmie businesses plugged into the banks, like Michelle Petrovich at the Key Bank and Rob Watton at the Umpqua Bank, on just how many businesses they've got connected with that due to the work of Kelly and some of our staff in helping those businesses negotiate the complexity and the confusion of how to get to those resources. And so anyway, Sean, if you could play a similar role, and perhaps with staff, to where I'd love to have various council members involved in some of these decisions and helping us vet these out as we go along. And we'll continue to have. Okay, Councilman Sinwell, your audio is kind of all mangled up.
I'll just keep it short. I will be more connected with the chamber on.
Okay, well, let's come back to him as audio cleans up a little bit. Councilman Lassay, go ahead.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to mention the Northwest Rail Museum almost as an example of it. We talk about every organization that we have funded and provided support for have different needs. They are different organizations. They are different levels of involvement with the community, but the common goal or common thread between all of them is that they support the communities that we live. The Senior Center, $8,000 may get them by for a while before they can get to the next step. I'd welcome every single organization to ask, because I think that's what the most difficult part right now is, to ask. People don't want to. They don't want to put themselves on a limb and say, we haven't been able to weather this. We all want to. I mean, my business is the same thing. We want to weather this. We're doing everything we can. The Northwest Rail Museum is at a whole nother level. There's a whole nother aspect of their work that is supporting of the community. And I think that, and across all the different organizations, we can talk about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing all the way along the way. Let's fund the most vulnerable citizens that we have, the Senior Center, give them a little extra to get them by for now. And I welcome everyone else to ask the same question, and we can address it as we go. We're not going to be able to, maybe we can wait another couple of weeks and we'll get 3 other requests and we can address those at that time. But ultimately, Mr. Mayor, you have the authority to make these decisions. We've given you that authority. I think we need to let that happen. Let's move on. I think you've already heard from a majority of council members that we supporting the Senior Center.
All right, thank you. Council, let's move on. I'm cognizant it's 9:18, and I don't know if everybody's been probably willing to go long enough to let Chief Phipps finish, but let's touch on a few of these real quickly. Nicole, can you speak?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So you asked me to speak on the business community needs and the impacts. I've been working really closely with the chamber, collaborating with them, just trying to help the businesses navigate, adapt, pivot, and how are they going to get through this. Many of the businesses have applied for different loans that are out there. Some of the response is slow. I think the number we heard Friday, Mayor, or maybe it was today, that 50 Snoqualmie businesses had applied.
At least
for
60
loan.
now.
What, how many?
60.
Okay, I missed that. And so the help is out there and they're all just trying to navigate through it. I do want to make a point. I'm not an expert on these loans and grants, but a lot of them are ruling out nonprofits. Nonprofits are not able to apply for some of this money. And so that's kind of compounding the problem for the topic you were just discussing, but not my area of expertise. The businesses that, they're having to change their business model. They're having to figure out, how do we operate in this kind of temporary new normal, and then also preparing them of what it's going to be like when society kind of reopens and we're living in a world of social distancing probably for several months. So for a lot of those businesses, things are now virtual or online delivery to go models. We've worked with the businesses, we've created some branding, get it to go, really trying to help promote that people can get their food delivered or third-party delivery, curbside pickup, all of those things. I've reached out, every day I reach out or talk to different businesses, whether it's email or I've been up to Snoqualmie several days and socially distanced, have conversations with some of the businesses, just checking on them, finding out what's working, what's not, how can we help them. Some of the things that's happening, we did an article, 425, promoting the businesses that were open. It really was mainly restaurant focused. There's also a restaurant app that we're promoting to the restaurants in the area that they log on, put their information on there so that people can pull it up on their phone and find out what restaurants in the area are open with to go. I'm seeing a lot of partnerships with businesses. Sigillo and the Candy Shop, they partnered over the weekend, ice cream for kids, wine for parents. No Boat is partnering with Heirloom. Kristen may not have a physical space, but she's still working, she's still cooking, and so she's trying to find outlets. She's also still interested in bringing her farmers market, so I'm trying to work with her to see if we can find a location. Farmers markets are proving to be something that are considered like a grocery store, and with proper social distancing, they can function. So I think that would be a nice element for our community to have back. Physical adaptions, the Bindle Stick, she opened up a to-go window in her backyard. She's, able to serve people in that capacity. The Candy Shop, they're pivoting, they're changing. Ice cream is a huge moneymaker for them in the spring and the summer. It's where they make the bulk of their yearly money. And so now they're doing curbside delivery. Also, some of the businesses, the retail, Provocatrix and Carousel, both are retail shops in the downtown core. They've realized they have to be website based. Provocatrix is up and running, and Carousel's website should be functioning, I think, this week. And that stemmed from the chamber. That was somebody involved with the chamber that helped Joelle, the owner of Carousel, to get her website up and going. As far as the city, we're just trying to help them with social media messaging. I'm on Instagram a lot with these businesses and sharing their stories and just saying that they're open and the different options that they have available to them. I want them, when this is sort of over, with air quotes, is that they look back and they say that the city cared and they tried and they were there for us. So that's what drives me in helping these businesses.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Mark, can you speak to some of the activity in the, it's actually all good news. We've been, we were very, very fortunate, all the few major construction projects we had going, the high school, the Church on the Ridge, the Boulder Building, the hockey arena, Panorama Homes and so forth, or the Spring Plaza, the only ones that were really not able to keep them going. The Boulder Building, which is kitty corner from the hockey arena across the street, was largely completed on the exterior and all that. So they were in pretty good shape when the shutdown occurred. So the only ones that were really suffering were the hockey arena and the Spring Plaza. But unfortunately, with we were doing work to at least get them to seal up the site to get moving a little bit more. But now with the governor's new directives, those can finally get underway as well. Mark, did you want to add anything to those components or?
I'll be brief, just some clarifications. We continue to remotely accept, review, and issue approvals on applications for building permits on our My Building permitting software. We also continue to accept and remotely process existing and land use development permits of all types. The reason that's important is given the governor's press conference last Friday, he opened low-risk construction activity for existing construction projects, as long as they have COVID-19 safety plans that allow only work which can be performed meeting specific social distancing requirements. We're seeking additional guidance from the governor regarding a refined definition of existing construction. For instance, a building permit issued, but no construction activity begun. So we're working to clarify that. We're also quickly working to communicate with and provide any needed direction and required inspections to all existing construction projects and active permittees in the city of Snoqualmie and Carnation. We experienced a high level of voluntary compliance on halting non-essential construction activity before last Friday. We're thankful for that. We're thankful to the community and builders, and we look forward to existing construction reactivating in conformance with safety plans.
All right, thank you, Mark. The only note I would also make is that just again, kudos to the chamber. We reached out and involved our state 5th district representatives in some of their Zoom meetings with the chamber members around the valley here, so they could hear stories directly inputted from that. And so that's been helpful in terms of those conversations as the governor was considering loosening up or getting some sectors back to work and developing those fairly rigorous safety protocols for construction. I want to really put a call out or shout out to Senator Mullet. We've been in close contact with him. He served on the governor's construction committee, helping develop those protocols. Again, to find a way to both take the safety issues very seriously, but get some sectors of the economy back to work. So that'll be very beneficial to us. And also a shout out to Representative Larry Springer, who is co-chair of the House House committees, and he came in along with his wife, who's the mayor of Kirkland, and joined us on some of those Zoom meetings. And Larry plays a very influential role down in the House there. So have both Larry in the House and Mark in the Senate, along with our other representatives, Callan and Ramos, was very, very helpful in that regard. And we'll continue to have conversations with them about other sectors such as landscaping in the future. Councilmember Ross and Councilmember Shepherd.
So do our inspectors have a role in monitoring the safety requirements at the site?
They have to have a supervisor assigned to monitor the activity. Yes.
And
Okay,
state L&I enforces the contractor and the project, but our inspectors ensure their own safety, and if they feel endangered at any moment, they would just leave the site.
And
Yeah,
this
so
is
I have been very, very firm with many of our developers. I said, look, we're working to get some of you guys back to work, but you got to meet me halfway here, which means we're going to be watching you have to take these implementations of the safety protocols very seriously, or we will be looking at having to shut down some of these projects. So I don't want to fool around about that, but I feel very strong about getting some of these sectors back to work. But at the same time, I feel very, very strong about making sure that people know that we shouldn't let our guard down on what we've accomplished to date with the efforts to mitigate the spread of the virus. Councilmember Shepherd.
The only thing that I was curious about is social distancing, I think, is doable. And I think that, wearing a mask is doable. And I don't know, I think most people would rather do it than not do that. But I was curious about testing. Do we have any indication that we're going to have more testing available? Because I know in Snoqualmie, you practically have to be on a hospital bed in order to get a test.
Yeah, well, we've been pressing that issue in those same conversations with legislators, or I was with the governor even when he called me. So we don't have much influence on some of that other than to make sure we're pressing the issue too. We were very pleased to see the hospital finally got back and running with the testing. We haven't seen apparently they're taking a week or more for the results to come back, because we haven't seen the number move from 19 for about 2 weeks now. So hopefully that'll start to change. But that's a great point, because right now in our community, we're sort of flying in the blind because when the hospital went down for testing for close to 2 weeks, we don't really have any handle on what's going on in our community in terms of the spread. So that is a concern, a huge concern. But obviously that's a high priority for the governor as well, where they're going to push some funding. What I was going to say on any questions on the construction stuff, we can have the staff provide a link to those protocols to the council. And for the sake of time, I'll just ask that we move on. Unless Mark, you have anything else to add, I'll just move on at this point then to communications and community resources, or Joan, what you and Gail have done.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So Gail and I are working on many communications through our usual channels, news release, website, social media, that type of thing, mainly with the highest level goals of health and safety information, getting things out about from public health, and also giving people information about city resources, the B&O tax suspension as needed, not collecting immediately on water late fees or not doing shutoffs, and just letting people know what the city's doing there to assist them. Also, a goal of really promoting the human services resources and supporting the senior center and supporting the school district and the food banks. You may notice in some of the news releases that we do ask for the donations, let people know that they can donate, but also I try to really let people know we're there to tell them where they can get assistance also. I don't want to assume that everyone in Snoqualmie wants to make a donation. Many people need to know about the resources that they can access. Another goal is really just to get out the general information. Metro, the route, unfortunately, Route 208 is done for now until they can come back. So as far as the website, we've got quite a few resources there, and I continue to gather them from internal sources and other groups. And I get that information from King County Emergency Management, the Snoqualmie Valley Chamber, different elected publications, that type of thing. I want to make sure that I get the right information, very, very accurate, getting it out on a timely basis through all of our channels. If you have any suggestions on information you want out further, just let me know. Any questions?
No, thank you, Joan. I do encourage the council members, if you haven't, to look at some of the material that she and Gail and others have put on the website. I think they've done a great job assembling a lot of information in a very quick, short amount of time. And to try it again, to give some guidance and assistance to those in need. Lastly, or a couple more, Perry, did you want to speak to any issues, enforcement issues, or just? Yeah, we can. And maybe whether it's DV or other issues you see that maybe is a cause for concern, or good news or bad news that you're seeing from the police perspective.
Well, I think that we're doing much better than most communities. We do have a slight uptick on domestic violence cases. Over the last 6 weeks, we've had 10 incidents. Normally we would have 5 or 6, maybe 7 at the high. So we've had an increase in domestic violence cases. Crisis calls, mental health calls have also increased slightly. But our biggest issue is really just the social distancing concerns, and people either upset that people are not social distancing and complying with the governor's order, or people just, at the park. We are increasing our visibility at the skate park. We're constantly dealing with issues at the skate park with kids just being at the skate park. So we're focusing on that right now. As far as enforcement issues, we are limited in who we can book, because if you've been watching the news, they're releasing people that are in custody for COVID-19 concerns. And so to book somebody, it really has to be a mandatory booking, and like a domestic violence case. So we are issuing citations where we may normally have booked them, but we're still booking those that need to go to jail. That's kind of all. The only other issue I guess I could bring up is that, from the very start, our focus was never an enforcement issue as far as COVID-19 violations, people not complying with the governor's order. It was really more of a focus on education and advising them of what the appropriate behavior was. There was some time when it got a little out of hand where we couldn't keep up with the number of calls of people not complying. But to be honest with you, over the last 2 weeks, it's gotten much, much better. And I've received less calls. There was a point I was getting 5 or 6 either emails or calls regarding those type of behaviors. So I think that's all I have on the enforcement side.
Great, thank you, Perry. Kevin, did you want to add anything on IT issues? I think that's one of our last ones.
No, as IT, we've been struggling with the remote work environment, keeping people's systems and laptops running, work from home when we can't touch them or see them. And then obviously we're struggling with problems with virtual meeting technologies and finding one that meets all of our criteria to be safe and accessible for our public. So, but other than that, we're still fully staffed. Everyone's still healthy. We're still running at capacity as far as tickets go. And we look forward to getting to some of the projects that have been on the back burner because of the COVID response.
Great, thank you. Rick, from a high level, is there anything I missed that you wanted to touch on or highlight?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I mean, I think we touched pretty much on everything. We're just looking at it from, from an organizational view, trying to, we have a committee for return to work, trying to help our community the best we can, trying to juggle CDC, governor's directives, and others, and obviously with the new directive, get some construction back going, obviously some recreation. I think it'll be good for our community. We are a unique community up here. I think we've discussed that quite a bit. Great community. So I'm happy that we're getting back to, I'm not going to call it normalcy, but at least getting back to doing business and trying to help where we can. So a lot of good discussion tonight. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rick. I call it getting back to a new abnormal. Councilor Shepherd.
So I was just curious how the staff is doing in general. Hello?
I can speak as far as the police department goes, as far as that. And that is one of the things I've been the most concerned with. Been pretty lucky with the officers. They're working as normal. So their day-to-day operations haven't changed a whole lot. Really, the issue is when they're home. To be honest with you, they're home. They're not coming into work. I have 3 of them that are working remotely, although I have 1 person in the front office at all times. But during the other times, the other 2 are at home. And so I constantly check and making sure they're okay. Those are the ones that I'm concerned about. The officers seem to be handling it well. I mean, they come to work the same time. They hop in their car. They're patrolling. They're doing all the same things that they used to do. Only thing they're a little frustrated with is, the issue about sometimes they want to take somebody to jail and maybe it's one of those discretionary times when they can't. And so really they're dealing with it really well. It's just the people I think that are staying home that are the issue.
Yeah, I think just for the sake of time, I'd love to have every department sort of report on how their staff are doing. My observation of Rick or Mark, actually Rick or Mark would be, Mark, let's throw it to you, Mark, and then Rick, because you 2 have been more involved in staffing issues and kind of getting everybody plugged in or reprogrammed. Could you 2 speak to that real quickly and then we can move on?
Sure, yeah. So to answer the question about how's the staff doing so far, I think the staff has done a remarkable and amazing job of evolving into a stay-at-home environment. It's been really challenging on a lot of different fronts. I know IT stepped up and got laptops assigned to people. We had to reassign them to some, and those that haven't had laptops are even adapting and willing to use their own devices or use their phone to communicate with or be part of that. So from a city business perspective, I think that again, all the city staff from what I've seen has been doing well. the fire department, like the police department, it's been business as usual. Similarly, in our utility department, those essential workers are still reporting to work. But overall, I've been quite happy and amazed at how well the staff has adapted to this new, like the mayor said, new abnormal. And I'll hand it off to Rick.
Thank you, Chief. Just real quick, we have a, how do I put this? We have a wonderful staff. How's that? Or we have wonderful staff. They adapt well, just like the chief said. I'm on the city manager, city administrator weekly call. We've been having them now, probably have them for the next couple of weeks, probably a total of 8 to 10 calls. And we talk about different things, just kind of like a go-to meeting and how different cities are doing. Some of the cities are struggling quite a bit. And you can see the stress on some of the managers and administrators' faces. I don't have that stress because we have great staff. We're in a unique situation where we're not affected as much as some of the other jurisdictions and agencies. So we're very blessed in that regard. So I think overall, I think staff are doing fairly well. And they do have some concerns. And obviously we're addressing that together as a group, as a team. And we'll get through this together as we move forward and start this return to work protocol. But yeah, it's been great. I think the staff is wonderful and they're doing well. So thank you for asking, Councilmember Shepherd.
Thank you both. I would just last conclude. I'm glad Mark brought up IT because of, if there's been a burden that's disproportionately fallen, IT's probably received the brunt of it, trying to get everybody set up on a stay at home and keep work going. So they've really done a phenomenal job. I know it's been a bit demoralizing for Kevin and some of his team when perhaps what the council prominently sees to some of the stumbles we've had in some of these council meetings here. That is certainly not indicative of the work they've been doing, and they've certainly had their hands full. I'll put a shout out to Robert too. He and his group, of course, with all the financial issues they're trying to analyze on it, in addition to keeping city business going. It's been a much bigger burden put on him as well, and he's been I think doing a pretty nice job of keeping things moving. So with that, council, it's 9:41. I think if we give the chief time, we could probably still wrap up here before 10 o'clock. I'm sorry, I know this is going long, but it's been a lot of important things to address and talk about. Can we kick it back to the chief to try and wrap up the roundtable here? All right. So chief, are you ready? Can we pull up the presentation we left off there and let him wrap that up?
Yeah, I'll be real brief. I really only have one more slide.
That was.
If Robert can or pull up that last slide.
Yep, doing it now.
Oh, Linda's sneaking out of the room again now. So.
We saw her.
Right. Oh, okay, there we go. Is this the slide we left?
Go, Robert.
Give me just a moment. Okay. I think we
go ahead and
finished
go to
with
the next slide. It's the 1 day look stat. Yeah. So this is my last slide, and it's really just a visual. I wanted you to take a look and see what 1 day looks like on our schedule. So it's a 24-hour period, and there's the top is AM, bottom is PM, obviously. And in the blue sections where it's filled in blue, those are when they're working. So any of the colored items, that's when they're working. So you can see, looking at the AM, you can see there are times during the day, and this is for both Snoqualmie and North Bend. It's not just Snoqualmie. So this is the total number of officers working both cities at one time. You can see that there are times when there's only 3 officers. Now this is at that earlier I talked about the number of hours, 2,080 is the, when there's no personal time off. This is that schedule. So this doesn't take into account any personal time. This does not take into account time off for training, sick, or anything else. This is when they're working all the time with no time off. And you can see there are times during the day where there's only 3 officers. And when that becomes problematic is when you have somebody that's arrested and then they have to be transported to jail. That at times may leave 1 or 2 officers to patrol both cities. And 1 or 2 officers really, it just takes 1 call. If there's a domestic violence call at that time, that's a minimum 2 officer response. And so you're depleted to 0 very, very fast and very easily if you look at this scale. So when you look at the numbers, it's good to look at what does that really look like? Is it a whole, what does that day look like? So you can go across and there's times from like noon to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There's 4 officers in blue working, and then there's an officer relief. And I did that when I first started. I took the 2 least senior officers and I made them vacation relief is what I call it. And they do just like the fire chief was talking about earlier, where they will fill in those spots. If somebody's gone to training, somebody's off on vacation, they will fill in that spot. So you can see there's times when, like I said, we only have, you know, from 3 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the morning, during those 4 hours, there's only 3 officers on the streets for both cities. And that's minimum staffing at its best. Because like I said, you can deplete those 3 officers very, very quickly. So I just wanted to give you a bird's eye view, if you will, on what a 1 day look like on our schedule. So when we talk about that we have 25 commissioned officers, this is what it really looks like. It looks like 3, 4, and 5 working at the same time. 5 is an optimum. That's a good day. So, and then the next slide is just questions.
Yeah, Councilmember Shepherd.
So one question I have is that obviously you cannot plan when somebody's going to be sick. And so that's a very tidy, you know, it just barely covers what you need to do. What do you do when you don't have enough officers? What happens now?
Well, we either flex one of the vacation relief, but if it's a sick, like they call in sick, we'll hold somebody over, or captain will work some patrol, or maybe a detective will work control, or it's just overtime. It's just an overtime slot. And you're right. It just takes one officer to not be there that day. That puts us in a situation where we have to make adjustments to people's schedules or bring somebody in overtime.
You can't go to, say, a pool of people that serve multiple cities that have a need for overflow help, if you will. You don't have that option, huh?
Well, we have that option on some of our details we do, like the Boeing Classic and so forth. When it's something like that we can plan for, then obviously we will go to the coalition and we will, well, we first put it out to our officers. And if we can't fill in those open spots, then we'll go to the coalition. And usually through those agencies, we will fill the needs that we have. We use them a lot during the summer.
So how many overtime hours have we had, say, for 2019?
Well, right now, because of COVID-19, I've put everybody on 12-hour shifts to make sure that we have proper coverage because of the unknown. I wasn't sure that how this was all going to play out, especially when he first put in the stay home, restrictions. I wasn't sure how that was going to play out, so I put them on 12-hour shifts. And the other reason I did that is because then there's no contact between the one unit and the next. So we didn't have, one person get sick in one unit and then have contact with somebody in the second unit, and now I have the whole department sick. So I divided them evenly, so if one unit got sick, I would at least have half of the department that should be well. We've been lucky so far with that, very, very lucky.
So we got any analysis as far as...
Councilmember Shepherd, I want to give an opportunity for other council members to ask questions if you could. Councilmember Mayhew?
Yeah, Chief, I just had one question for you. Or a follow-up question too. Our prosecutor is a contractor, is that true?
Yes.
So if we cut all our contractors, we wouldn't have any prosecutor.
No.
Just saying.
All right. Any other questions from council members? Councilmember Holloway or Councilmember Sunwell? All right, Councilmember Shepherd.
So I was wondering if you've done any analysis as far as what cost savings or opportunities there may be if we increased our headcount.
Yes, I actually have one of the issues is you're always going to have overtime. If you talk to anybody, they're always going to say they're understaffed, and sometimes they really are. When you look at this, you can say that we're right at that level. But overtime, sometimes it's unavoidable. And like when somebody calls in sick, I have not done an analysis this year as far as overtime I did last year, but not this year so far.
All right, if there's no further discussion or comment, I think we pretty much did staff reports too. The last thing I did, Chief, thank you very much for the presentation. I don't think we're going to be able to, well, maybe we can get this in 10 minutes. Robert, go ahead and jump into the kind of the update on the upcoming work plan schedule.
Yeah, I'll leave this to the Mayor Pro Tem to elaborate on. We just made some changes and I'll just leave it to Jim.
Thank you, sir.
So this is just kind of looking forward, folks. We've got the work plan that we laid out, and as we look forward tonight, April 27th, you see fire and police level of service discussions. But here's the thing, as one of the other council members pointed out earlier, there's a whole bunch of other departments. We want to hear from all of them. So right now that's scheduled for May 11th, but think about it. That's administrative departments, Parks and Public Works, community development. And then by May 25th, we need to move into the tax and fee discussion, and then move into actually policy options. What are we going to do? Because in June, we got to start taking up the CIP. So my suggestion, folks, this accounts for what you see on the schedule here, accounts for every Council Monday, plus there's a 5th Monday on June 29th. All of those meetings are already spoken for. I don't think we can get through all of these departments and be able to ask the questions that we want to ask in one meeting on May 11th in one roundtable. And I suggest to y'all, I think we're going to need a special meeting to catch up. If it's okay with you, I'd like to ask the city clerk or whomever's appropriate to poll us, and let's see if we can identify a special meeting so we have a chance to catch up on all this, because it's all just going to start cascading into June and July, and we've got other things coming at us at 100 miles an hour. So hopefully there's no objection to that, and we'll just ask for some polling, and you guys can see the need for that, hopefully. Yeah, I'm not seeing any objection to that. So Robert, can you just turn the page? So then you see this is more July, we get into the utilities. In June, it was the non-utility CIP. Then we get into utility CIP, the proposed operating and amended CIP budgets in August. Try and get adoption of the CIP in August. So it just keeps rolling at us in order to get into the budget cycle and get everything ready in time for the budget, so we don't have a big rush. So this kind of just shows you just moving right on in July and August. Go ahead, Robert, and change the page. And then here's the thing, is just to give you a heads up for the committees, we need to start really digging into some of these things at the committees. So starting in May, we've got to revisit the non-utility CIP. That needs to be a 6-year lookout. So I think we have to tag one more year on it. But the other thing is, if you think back to the revenue presentations that we've already had, the amount that we currently have listed out to spend in our non-utility CIP is way bigger than those sources are. So we're going to have to relook at that, and and plus we got to think about what is the impact of the REIT collections probably being significantly differently than we hoped because of COVID. So we're going to have to relook at a lot in non-utility CIP, and that discussion has started at Parks and Public Works. So they're going to have to start into that in May so they can bring things to us on a timely basis. In June, we've got the operational cost reviews, Parks and Public Works. F&A, and other committees. And so you see this just kind of lays out some of the committee work we're gonna have. So on top of the agenda bills that we have to deal with for just normal activities, and on top of the things we're gonna have to do for COVID-19, these are the things we also have to take up in our committees. So just giving you a heads up, believe it or not, the pace is gonna pick up if we're gonna stay on schedule, not relax. So, yeah, thank you, Mayor, for letting me go last with that fun news.
Anytime. All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So with that, Council, I think that pretty much wraps things up. And gosh, we're out 6 minutes early. That's assuming we were shooting for 10 o'clock. I would be remiss going back to some of the council reports earlier if I didn't mention that if there was one symptom I also, when sick with the COVID-19, one symptom that I think both Rick and I experienced or discovered was being a little grumpy. And although the two of us continued to work through our illness, it was not exactly at 100% and being somewhat in a fog. And so I would be remiss if not recognizing Mark Carrera stepping in at that critical time in those first couple of weeks and really taking the bull by the horns and helping get things organized. He did a phenomenal job, and just want to put a big call out to him for his efforts as well. So with that, Council, there being no further business, yeah, thank you, a little applause there. There be no further business before the Council. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All right. I have 2 motions and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion. Didn't hear any opposition. Motion's carried. Enjoy the rest of your long evening. Thank you, Council.